Hey there, and welcome to Beyond the Veil. I'm here to help you drift off into a peaceful sleep, offering soothing stories and gentle guidance. Before we settle into dreamland, let me know in the comments, which country are you from? And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more restful nights. The heartland of America, Nebraska, stretched out like a rumpled green quilt under an endless sky. It was a land of hard work and simple pleasures, a place where the rhythm of life was dictated by the seasons and the needs of the soil, and in the middle of it all, nestled amongst seemingly infinite rows of corn, sat Caleb's farm. Caleb was a man of the land, through and through. His hands, calloused and strong, told a story of years spent tilling the soil, coaxing life from the earth. He knew the subtle shifts in the wind, the precise moment when rain was needed, and the quiet hum of the corn as it grew tall and strong under the summer sun. Farming wasn't just his job, it was his heritage, his identity, woven into the very fabric of his being. He'd inherited the farm from his father, who had inherited it from his father before him, a lineage stretching back to the pioneers who first broke ground on this unforgiving, yet bountiful, land. His days were long and demanding, beginning before sunrise and often stretching past sunset, but he didn't complain. There was a deep satisfaction in seeing the fruits of his labor, in knowing he was providing for his family and contributing to something larger than himself. His life wasn't glamorous, but it was honest, and it was his farmhouse, a sturdy two-story structure painted a faded white, stood as a testament to the resilience of those who called this place home. It was isolated, miles from the nearest town, offering both peace and a profound sense of solitude. The nearest neighbor was over a mile away, their house only visible in winter. The sunsets in Nebraska were legendary, painting the sky in vibrant hues of orange, purple, and gold. Every evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the cornfields, the landscape transformed into a breathtaking vista. But for Caleb, these beautiful sunsets were about to become tainted by an unsettling mystery. What once brought him peace, now brought a feeling of deep unease. This started subtly at first, but then started to grow and spread through him like the roots of the corn he so loved to grow. The loneliness of the prairie, once a comforting companion, now felt like a heavy cloak. The first time Caleb saw it, he almost didn't register it at all. He'd been finishing up his chores for the day, securing the barn doors against the coming night, when he glanced out towards the western edge of his property. The sun was just beginning its descent, painting the sky in those familiar, vibrant hues, and there, in the distance, silhouetted against the fiery backdrop, was a figure. It was far off, near the edge of the cornfield closest to the county road, a dark, vaguely human shape standing perfectly still amidst the swaying stalks. Caleb squinted, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. He'd been working since dawn, and his eyes were tired. He figured it was just a trick of the light, a shadow cast by a particularly tall row of corn. Maybe it was just a deer standing in the field. He chuckled softly to himself, attributing it to fatigue and the long hours he'd been putting in. Just seeing things, he muttered, turning back to his work. He secured the last latch on the barn door, the metallic click echoing in the still evening air. The wind was low, only rustling the corn softly, a familiar, comforting sound that usually lulled him into a sense of peace. But tonight, there was a slight undercurrent of something else. A prickling on the back of his neck. He glanced back towards the west one last time. The figure was still there, immobile, unwavering. He dismissed it again, more firmly this time. Needs more sleep, he told himself. He was probably just imagining things, or it was some kids messing around. He hadn't seen any cars pass by on the county road, but that didn't mean anything. Teenagers were known for walking for miles to get up to no good. He'd deal with it in the morning. He walked back towards the farmhouse, the gravel crunching beneath his worn boots. Sarah was already inside, starting dinner. The smell of roasting chicken wafted out from the open windows, a comforting aroma that usually put him at ease, but tonight, it couldn't quite dispel the nagging feeling in the back of his mind. He couldn't shake the image of that solitary figure standing motionless in his cornfield. It bothered him more than he cared to admit, but he was a practical man, a man of the land, that he wouldn't let a fleeting shadow disrupt his peace, not yet. Anyway, that he resolved to check it out in the morning and put the matter to rest. That it was probably nothing, just nothing. The next morning, Caleb woke with the sunrise, determined to put the previous evening's unease to rest. That he grabbed his coffee and headed out to the cornfield, intending to walk the perimeter and find whatever had cast that unsettling silhouette. But the day was filled with the usual demands of farm life. A broken fence needed mending, a tractor needed servicing, and a sudden downpour threatened to flood a section of the lower field. The morning slipped away, then the afternoon, and by the time Caleb finally had a moment to spare, the sun was already beginning to sink towards the horizon. He cursed under his breath. He'd wanted to investigate in the daylight, but now he was going to have to do it at dusk again. He grabbed a flashlight and headed towards the western edge of the field, his boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. As he approached the area where he'd seen the figure the night before, his pace slowed, and then he saw it was there again, standing motionless amidst the corn stalks, but this time, it was closer, noticeably closer. It had moved, somehow, during the day, or perhaps during the night. It was now several rows deeper into the field. Caleb's heart pounded in his chest. It wasn't a trick of the light. It wasn't a shadow. It was undeniably there. The figure was still indistinct, shrouded in the growing twilight. It was tall and thin, its form vaguely human-shaped. It appeared to be wearing some sort of dark clothing, perhaps a long coat or cloak. Its head was covered, possibly by a hat or hood, obscuring its face. He still couldn't make out any distinct features. It was more like a dark void, a hole in the tapestry of the evening. A chill ran down Caleb's spine. Despite the warmth of the late summer air, this was no longer a simple matter of fatigue or imagination. Something was definitely wrong. He felt a growing unease, a sense of dread that settled heavy in his stomach. He wanted to dismiss it, to find a logical explanation, but he couldn't. The figure was too real, too persistent. He told himself it was probably just some lost soul, someone who needed help, maybe a homeless person seeking shelter in the cornfield. But even as he tried to convince himself of this, he knew it wasn't true. There was something unnatural about the figure's stillness, its unwavering presence, its silent encroachment into his land. He started to get stressed, and he knew that he was going to have to do something about this. That evening, as Caleb and Sarah sat down for dinner, the aroma of the roast chicken doing little to soothe Caleb's frayed nerves, he knew he couldn't keep it to himself any longer. He had to tell Sarah. He'd always shared everything with her, from the smallest joys to the biggest worries, but this felt different. It felt like he was teetering on the edge of something inexplicable, and he was afraid of what she might think. He started tentatively, clearing his throat. Sarah, I saw something out in the cornfield last night. Sarah looked up from her plate, her brow furrowed slightly. Something? What do you mean, something? He hesitated, searching for the right words. A figure, standing out there, near the western edge of the field. Sarah chuckled softly. A deer, probably. Or maybe one of those teenagers from town, up to no good. No, it wasn't a deer, Caleb insisted. And it wasn't kids. It was a person, standing perfectly still, and it was there again tonight, closer this time. Sarah's expression shifted from amusement to concern. She knew Caleb wasn't one to exaggerate or imagine things. He was a practical man, grounded in reality. If he said he saw something, he saw something. Closer? She asked, her voice laced with a hint of worry. What do you mean, closer? Caleb explained what he'd seen, describing the tall, dark figure, its indistinct form, its unsettling stillness. He told her how it had moved further into the field overnight, how it seemed to be getting closer to the house with each passing sunset. Sarah listened intently, her eyes fixed on Caleb's face. When he finished, she reached across the table and took his hand. Caleb, honey, you've been working so hard lately. You're exhausted. Maybe it's just your eyes playing tricks on you. I don't think so, Sarah, Caleb replied, his voice firm. I know what I saw. Sarah sighed. She didn't want to dismiss his concerns, but she struggled to believe what he was telling her. It sounded so strange, so unbelievable. Well, maybe it's a scarecrow, she suggested, trying to find a logical explanation. You know, one of those old ones that got blown down and ended up further in the field. I checked the scarecrows, Sarah. They're all still standing where they should be. Okay, Sarah said, thinking. Then maybe it's a lost hiker, someone who got turned around and ended up wandering into our field. Maybe, Caleb conceded. But why would they just stand there, motionless, every night at sunset? Sarah didn't have an answer. She was skeptical, but she was also worried about Caleb. He looked tired and stressed, and she could see the fear in his eyes. Look, she said, squeezing his hand. I don't know what it is you're seeing, Caleb, but I trust you, and I'm worried about you. Maybe we should call the sheriff, just to be safe. Caleb hesitated. He didn't want to involve the authorities. He didn't want to be the laughingstock of the county, but he also knew he couldn't ignore what was happening. Let's wait a few more days, he said. I want to see if it moves again. If it does, then we'll call the sheriff. Sarah nodded, relieved that he was at least considering the possibility. She knew that whatever Caleb was seeing was affecting him deeply, and she wanted to help him find a solution, even if she didn't fully understand what was going on. The next few evenings followed a similar, increasingly disturbing pattern. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in its fiery hues, the figure reappeared. Each time a few rows closer to the farmhouse. Caleb's anxiety grew with each passing day, morphing into a gnawing fear that threatened to consume him. The logical explanations that Sarah had offered, the scarecrow, the lost hiker, now seemed ludicrous, inadequate in the face of the undeniable reality unfolding before him. He tried to rationalize it, to find some semblance of control over the situation. He started keeping a closer watch on the cornfield during the day, patrolling the perimeter, searching for any sign of the figure's presence, but he found nothing. No footprints, no discarded belongings, no indication that anyone had been there at all. One evening, driven by a desperate need to confront the unknown, Caleb decided to approach the figure directly. As the sun began to set, casting long, distorted shadows across the cornfield, he grabbed a flashlight and started walking towards the western edge of his property. He could see the figure standing there, motionless as always, a dark silhouette against the fading light. He walked purposefully, his boots crunching on the dry earth, his heart pounding in his chest. But as he got closer, something strange began to happen. He found himself inexplicably veering off course, as if an invisible force was subtly redirecting his path. He would try to correct his trajectory, to walk straight towards the figure, but his feet would stubbornly lead him astray, guiding him along a circuitous route that always kept him at a distance. He tried to force himself to walk directly towards the figure, but it was like pushing against an invisible wall. His muscles strained, his breath came in ragged gasps, but he couldn't seem to overcome the resistance. It was as if the figure was surrounded by some kind of invisible barrier, preventing him from getting too close. Frustrated and bewildered, Caleb stopped, panting for breath. He stared at the figure, its dark form still standing motionless amidst the corn stalks. He felt a sense of helplessness wash over him, a chilling realization that he was not in control. Something else was at play here, something he didn't understand. He tried a different approach. Instead of walking directly towards the figure, he tried to flank it, to approach it from the side, but the same thing happened. He found himself inexplicably unable to move directly towards it. And no matter what he tried, he was always subtly redirected, always kept at a distance. The frustration was mounting, and he knew he was going to have to come up with a plan soon, before the figure came any closer. Driven to the edge of desperation by his inability to approach the figure and the escalating sense of dread, Caleb turned to research. He spent hours poring over old newspapers at the local library, his eyes scanning for any mention of strange occurrences or unexplained disappearances in the area. He felt a growing need to understand if this had happened before, to see if there was any precedent for what he was experiencing. The librarian, A kindly old woman named Mrs. Henderson noticed his unusual interest and struck up a conversation that she'd lived in the county her entire life and knew the local history better than anyone. Caleb, hesitant at first, eventually confided in her about the figure in his cornfield. Mrs. Henderson listened patiently, her expression growing increasingly somber. When he finished, she led him to a dusty section of the library dedicated to local folklore and legends. "You might find something of interest here, Caleb," she said, her voice hushed. "There are stories, old stories, about things that happen out in the cornfields, things that aren't easily explained." Caleb spent the next few hours immersed in these forgotten tales that he read about strange lights seen hovering over the fields, about livestock vanishing without a trace, and about farmers who had gone mad and disappeared, never to be seen again. He found accounts of cornfield spirits, malevolent entities said to haunt the land, preying on the vulnerable and the isolated. He discovered unsettling omens tied to the land, a sudden, unexplained blight on the crops, an unusual silence among the birds, a persistent feeling of being watched. He read about rituals and superstitions passed down through generations, meant to appease the spirits and protect the fields from harm. Most of it he wrote off as superstitious nonsense, but some of the stories resonated with him, striking a chord of fear deep within his soul. One story in particular caught his attention. It told of a farmer who, during a time of great hardship and crop failure, had made a pact with a dark entity in exchange for prosperity, but the entity had demanded a terrible price, and the farmer had ultimately paid with his sanity and his life. The story ended with a warning: "Beware the shadows that walk in the cornfields, for they are not always what they seem." Caleb closed the book, his hands trembling. He didn't know what to make of what he had read. Was it all just folklore, the product of overactive imaginations and superstitious beliefs, or was there some truth to these old tales, some hidden reality that he was now confronting? He left the library that evening with more questions than answers. The stories he had read had only deepened his unease, fueling his fear and making him feel even more isolated and vulnerable. He began to think about getting a gun. The following evening, Sarah decided to see for herself. She'd seen the toll it was taking on Caleb, the dark circles under his eyes, the haunted look in his gaze. She still held on to a sliver of skepticism, a hope that there was a rational explanation, but she couldn't deny the genuine fear that gripped her husband. As the sun began to set, she joined Caleb on the porch, her arm linked through his. The air was still and heavy, pregnant with the scent of ripening corn. They stood in silence, their eyes fixed on the western edge of the field. At first, Sarah saw nothing. The long shadows cast by the setting sun played tricks on her eyes, creating fleeting shapes and illusions in the swaying corn stalks. She started to think that maybe Caleb was right, that it was all just a product of his imagination, fueled by stress and exhaustion. But then, she saw it. A dark figure, standing motionless amidst the corn. It was closer now, much closer than she had imagined. It was tall and thin, its form vaguely human-shaped, shrouded in shadow. She could make out the dark clothing, the covered head, the unnerving stillness. A shiver ran down her spine. All her skepticism vanished in an instant, replaced by a cold, hard fear. It was real. It was undeniably real, she gasped, clutching Caleb's arm tightly. "I see it," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I see it, Caleb." Caleb squeezed her hand, his eyes fixed on the figure. He felt a strange mixture of relief and terror, relief that Sarah had finally seen it, that he wasn't going crazy, terror at the undeniable reality of the situation. They stood there for what seemed like an eternity, watching the figure in silence. It didn't move. It didn't speak. It just stood there, a dark sentinel in the cornfield. Finally, Sarah broke the silence. What is it, Caleb?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Caleb shook his head. "I don't know, Sarah. I just don't know." They went inside. The image of the figure burned into their minds. The fear was palpable, hanging heavy in the air. "We have to do something, Caleb," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "We can't just keep watching it get closer and closer." "I know," Caleb replied, his face grim. "I've been thinking about calling the sheriff." Sarah nodded. "Maybe we should, but what are we going to tell them, that we're seeing a ghost in our cornfield?" Caleb sighed. "I know that they'll think we're crazy, that they'll laugh us out of town. But what else can we do?" Sarah asked, her voice laced with desperation. "We can't just sit here and wait for it to what? I don't even know what it wants." They spent the rest of the evening debating what to do, weighing the risks and benefits of calling the police. They were afraid of being ridiculed, of being dismissed as delusional, but they were also afraid of what would happen if they did nothing. The decision was a difficult one, a choice between two equally terrifying possibilities, desperate for concrete evidence. Something they could show the sheriff to prove they weren't simply imagining things. Caleb decided to set up surveillance. He borrowed a couple of motion sensor cameras from a friend and retrieved his old trail cameras from the shed, the ones he used for deer hunting. That he meticulously positioned them around the western edge of the cornfield, carefully aiming them at the area where the figure appeared each evening. He spent the next day checking and rechecking the cameras, ensuring they were properly positioned and functioning correctly. He even tested them himself, walking through the field to trigger the motion sensors. The cameras clicked and whirred, capturing his image as he moved. He felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he could capture the figure on film, providing undeniable proof of its existence. That evening, as the sun began to set, Caleb and Sarah waited anxiously inside the farmhouse, their eyes glued to the monitor connected to the cameras. The cornfield appeared on the screen, swaying gently in the breeze. The cameras were working perfectly, capturing every movement, every shadow. But as the sun dipped below the horizon and the figure appeared, a strange thing happened. The cameras aimed directly at the figure began to malfunction. The images flickered, distorted, and then dissolved into static. The motion sensors stopped working, failing to detect the figure's presence. Caleb cursed under his breath, fiddling with the cameras, trying to adjust the settings, but nothing worked. The cameras that were pointed at the figure remained stubbornly out of order, while the other cameras continued to function perfectly, capturing images of the surrounding cornfield. He tried repositioning the cameras, aiming them at the figure from different angles. But the same thing happened every time. As soon as the figure came into view, the cameras malfunctioned, displaying only static. Frustrated and bewildered, Caleb replayed the footage from the previous nights, hoping to find some clue, some anomaly that he had missed, but the results were always the same. The cameras would record the cornfield perfectly until the moment the figure appeared, at which point the images would dissolve into static. It was as if the figure was somehow interfering with the cameras, preventing them from capturing its image. The failure of the cameras only deepened the mystery, adding another layer of unease to an already terrifying situation. It was as if the figure didn't want to be seen, as if it was actively resisting any attempt to document its presence. The sense of helplessness washed over Caleb and Sarah. They were fighting something they couldn't understand, something that seemed to defy the laws of nature. He had to think of a new plan. The failed attempt to capture the figure on camera marked a turning point for Caleb. The mystery consumed him, eclipsing everything else in his life. Sleep became a luxury he could barely afford. He tossed and turned in bed, haunted by the image of the dark figure standing silently in his cornfield. Even when he did manage to drift off, his dreams were filled with unsettling visions, endless rows of corn, dark shadows lurking in the stalks, and a figure beckoning him forward with an outstretched hand. His work suffered. The farm, once his pride and joy, now felt like a burden. He neglected his chores, leaving fences unrepaired, weeds untended, and equipment unmaintained. The corn, once a symbol of life and prosperity, now seemed to mock him, its rustling leaves whispering secrets he couldn't understand. His relationship with Sarah became strained. She tried to be supportive, but she couldn't fully comprehend the depth of his obsession. She worried about him, about his health, about his sanity. She tried to talk to him, to reason with him, to pull him back from the brink. But her efforts were met with increasing resistance. He was too consumed by the mystery, too focused on understanding the figure's purpose, to pay attention to anything else that he spent hours pacing the farmhouse, muttering to himself, poring over the folklore he had discovered at the library. He tried to find some pattern, some connection, some clue that would explain the figure's presence. That he became convinced that it was trying to communicate something, that it had a purpose, a reason for being there. "It's not just standing there to scare us, Sarah," he would say, his eyes wide with a feverish intensity. "It wants something, that it's trying to tell us something, that we just have to figure out what it is." Sarah grew increasingly worried. She saw him slipping away, losing himself in a world of fear and paranoia. She tried to remind him of their life before the figure, of the simple joys they had shared, of the love that had bound them together, but her words seemed to fall on deaf ears. One evening, after another sleepless night, Caleb announced that he had a plan. "I'm going to find out what it wants, Sarah," he said, his voice determined. "I'm going to go out there and confront it. I'm going to make it tell me what it wants." Sarah pleaded with him not to go. She was terrified of what might happen, of what the figure might do to him, but Caleb was resolute. That he was convinced that he had no other choice. He was obsessed with understanding the figure's purpose, and he was willing to risk everything to find out the truth. That he felt like he was at the edge of a cliff, and he was ready to jump. That evening, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows that stretched across the yard and seemingly reached out towards the farmhouse, Caleb steeled himself. He knew he couldn't delay any longer. The figure was now only a few rows into the cornfield, close enough that he could make out more details than ever before, details that chilled him to the bone. He stood on the porch, Sarah clinging to his arm, begging him to stay, but his mind was made up. He had to know. He had to understand. "I'll be careful, Sarah," he promised, his voice strained. "I just need to talk to it. I need to know what it wants." He stepped off the porch and walked towards the cornfield, his heart pounding in his chest. The air was thick with anticipation, heavy with a sense of impending doom. As he approached the edge of the field, he could see the figure standing there, motionless as always, but now, in the fading light, he could discern more details. The figure was wearing tattered clothes, rags that hung loosely on its frame. They were dark and faded, as if they had been worn for years, exposed to the elements, and never washed. The material was ripped and torn in places, revealing glimpses of something underneath, something pale and unsettling. That he could also see that the figure was wearing a hat, a wide-brimmed hat that obscured its face, casting it in deep shadow. He couldn't make out any features, only the darkness beneath the brim. It was as if the hat was deliberately hiding its identity, preventing him from seeing who, or what, was standing there. But the most unnerving thing about the figure was its stillness. It didn't move, it didn't breathe, it didn't even twitch. It was as if it was a statue, a lifeless effigy planted in the cornfield. Yet, Caleb knew it was alive. He could feel its presence, a cold, malevolent energy that radiated from it like heat from a fire. As he stood there, staring at the figure, a chilling realization washed over him. It wasn't just coming closer. It was waiting. It was waiting for him. He hesitated for a moment, a flicker of doubt crossing his mind. Maybe Sarah was right, maybe he was making a mistake, maybe he should just turn around and go back to the farmhouse. But then, he thought about all the sleepless nights, all the anxiety, all the fear that had consumed him. He thought about his farm, his family, his life that had been disrupted by this unsettling presence. He knew he couldn't back down now. He had to confront it. He had to end it. And this was just the start. As Caleb stood at the edge of the cornfield, his resolve wavering for a moment, a memory surfaced, triggered by the figure's tattered clothes and the oppressive atmosphere. It was a story Mrs. Henderson, the librarian, had mentioned, a tragic tale she'd initially hesitated to share, deeming it too disturbing. Flashback sequence begins. The camera pans across a sepia-toned photograph of a weathered farmhouse, identical in style to Caleb's but bearing the marks of neglect and decay. A voiceover, gravelly and tinged with melancholy, Mrs. Henderson's, begins to narrate. "This is the Miller farm. Thomas Miller was a good man, a hard-working farmer, just like your Caleb. He loved this land, poured his heart and soul into it. The image shifts to a close-up of Thomas Miller's face, a stern but kind-looking man with eyes that held a deep-seated worry. But the late 1930s were hard on everyone. The Dust Bowl ravaged the Midwest, crops failed, and farmers were driven to the brink of despair. Thomas was no exception. He fell into debt, struggled to feed his family, and watched as his farm slowly slipped away. The images become more somber. Dust storms rage across the landscape, burying fields and homes. Thomas argues with a stern-looking banker, his face etched with desperation. His wife, Mary, looks on with a mixture of fear and sadness. Thomas tried everything he could to save his farm. He borrowed money, worked day and night, but it was never enough. The bank threatened foreclosure, and Thomas began to lose hope. He started to act strangely, talking to himself, wandering aimlessly through the fields. He lost sleep and spent most of his time alone out in the corn. The image shifts to Thomas wandering through the cornfield at sunset, his figure silhouetted against the sky. He looks gaunt and disheveled, his clothes tattered and torn. One evening, Thomas disappeared. He went out to check on the crops and never came back. Mary searched for him for days, but she couldn't find him. The sheriff organized a search party, but they found nothing, not a trace. Thomas Miller had simply vanished. The image fades to black. Some say he wandered into the cornfields and got lost, succumbing to the elements. Others say he took his own life, unable to bear the shame of losing his farm. But there are whispers of something else, whispers of a darkness that dwells in the cornfields, a malevolent force that preys on the weak and the vulnerable. The camera slowly zooms in on the corn stalks, the wind rustling through the leaves, creating an unsettling whisper. They say Thomas Miller went mad, driven to despair by debt and crop failure. They say he still wanders the cornfields, a restless spirit trapped between worlds, forever searching for a way to reclaim what he lost. Flashback sequence ends. The camera snaps back to Caleb, standing at the edge of his cornfield, the figure still standing motionless a few rows in. The story of Thomas Miller resonates deeply with him, fueling his fear and strengthening his resolve. He couldn't let the same fate befall him. He had to protect his farm, his family, his sanity, and he had to do it now. The story of Thomas Miller echoed in Caleb's mind, a chilling premonition of what could become of him if he didn't take action. He couldn't let the figure continue to encroach on his land, to chip away at his sanity, to threaten his family. He had to put an end to it, once and for all. He turned back towards the farmhouse, his face grim. Sarah was still standing on the porch, her eyes filled with fear and desperation. He knew what he had to do. He walked into the house and retrieved his shotgun from the gun cabinet. It was an old weapon, a relic from his father, but it was reliable and he knew how to use it. He loaded it with shells, the metallic click echoing in the silent house. Sarah rushed inside, her voice frantic. "Caleb, what are you doing? You can't do this." "I have to, Sarah," Caleb replied, his voice firm. "I can't let it get any closer. I have to protect us." "But you don't know what it is," Sarah cried. "You don't know what it's capable of. You can't just go out there with a gun and expect everything to be okay." "I don't have a choice, Sarah," Caleb said, his eyes filled with a desperate resolve. "I've tried everything else. I've tried to ignore it, I've tried to rationalize it, I've tried to document it, but nothing works. It just keeps getting closer and closer. I have to stop it, before it's too late." "Please, Caleb," Sarah pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "Don't do this. It's not worth it. We can call the sheriff, we can move away, we can do anything, just don't go out there." Caleb hesitated for a moment, his resolve wavering under the weight of Sarah's pleas. He loved her more than anything in the world, and he didn't want to put her in danger, but he also knew that he couldn't live with the fear and uncertainty any longer. He had to know what the figure wanted, and he was willing to risk everything to find out. "I'm sorry, Sarah," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "But I have to do this. I have to protect our home." He kissed her gently on the forehead, then turned and walked out of the house, the shotgun clutched tightly in his hands. That he didn't know what awaited him in the cornfield, but he was ready to face it. That he was ready to fight for his farm, his family, his life. The sun was setting and he could feel the figure waiting. The corn stalks rustled in the evening breeze, their whispering sound seeming to mock Caleb as he stepped into the field. The earth was soft and damp beneath his boots, and the air was thick with the scent of ripening corn. The setting sun cast long, distorted shadows that danced around him, creating an eerie and unsettling atmosphere. That he walked slowly and deliberately, the shotgun held firmly in his grip. His heart pounded in his chest, a mixture of fear and adrenaline coursing through his veins. That he was terrified of what he might find, of what the figure might do. But he was also driven by a desperate need to know, to understand, to finally put an end to the mystery that had consumed his life. As he approached the figure, he could feel its presence growing stronger, a cold, malevolent energy that seemed to radiate from it like heat from a fire. That he could now see the tattered clothes more clearly, the ripped and torn fabric revealing glimpses of something pale and unsettling underneath. The hat still obscured its face, casting it in deep shadow. That he stopped a few feet away from the figure, his shotgun raised and aimed directly at its chest. His hands trembled slightly, but his voice was firm as he spoke. "Who are you?" he demanded. "What do you want? Why are you here?" The figure remained motionless. It didn't speak, it didn't move, it didn't even acknowledge his presence. It just stood there, a silent sentinel in the cornfield. Caleb's frustration grew. That he had come this far, risked everything, and the figure wouldn't even acknowledge him. He tightened his grip on the shotgun, his finger hovering over the trigger. "I'm warning you," he said, his voice rising. "I'm not afraid to use this. Tell me who you are and what you want, or I'll shoot." Still, the figure remained motionless. Caleb stared at the figure, his mind racing. That he couldn't understand it. Why was it just standing there, silent and unmoving? Was it trying to taunt him? Was it waiting for him to make a mistake? As he stood there, a strange sensation washed over him, a sense of acceptance, a feeling that he had somehow been expecting this all along. That it was as if he had known, deep down, that this moment was inevitable, that he was destined to confront this figure in the cornfield. The fear was still there, but it was mixed with a strange sense of calm, a feeling that he was finally where he was supposed to be. That he was still ready to fight, but he was also ready to accept whatever fate awaited him. This strange sense of calm started to ease his frayed nerves. Driven by a mixture of desperation and a newfound sense of calm, Caleb took a step closer to the figure. The air grew colder, and the rustling of the corn stalks seemed to intensify, as if the entire field was holding its breath. He peered intently at the figure, trying to make out any distinguishing features. The hat still obscured its face, casting it in deep shadow, but as he got closer, he could sense something shifting, something changing. Suddenly, slowly, the figure began to turn its head. The movement was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was undeniable. The figure was finally acknowledging his presence. Caleb's heart pounded in his chest. He tightened his grip on the shotgun, his finger hovering over the trigger. He didn't know what to expect, but he was ready for anything. The figure continued to turn its head, its face slowly emerging from the shadows. Caleb strained his eyes, trying to make out its features, but the light was fading, and the hat still cast a deep shadow over its face. He could see only darkness, a void where its eyes should be. But then, for a fleeting moment, he saw something else. A glimmer, a spark, a flicker of light. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, but Caleb was certain he had seen it. A glimmer of recognition, or perhaps something else, something far more unsettling. The glimmer reminded him of himself, a spark that he saw in the mirror every day. As the figure's face came into full view, Caleb gasped. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. It was like looking into a mirror, but a distorted, twisted version of himself. The face was gaunt and pale, the skin stretched taut over the bones, the eyes were sunken and dark, filled with a deep-seated sadness. But it was the glimmer, that fleeting spark of recognition, that truly terrified him. It was as if he was looking at his own soul, stripped bare and exposed to the harsh realities of the world that he wasn't sure if he was seeing a reflection of his own fear and despair, or if the figure was somehow mirroring his own identity back at him. The line between reality and illusion blurred, and he felt himself teetering on the edge of madness. This had to be it, the unsettling glimmer of recognition in the figure's eyes sent a jolt of fear through Caleb, but it was quickly followed by an even more disturbing sensation, an irresistible compulsion, a powerful urge to get closer, to understand, to connect with the figure in some way. As if responding to this unspoken desire, the figure slowly raised a hand, its movements deliberate and graceful. The hand was skeletal and pale, the fingers long and bony. It extended towards Caleb, beckoning him forward. Caleb froze, his mind reeling that he didn't know what to do. Part of him, the rational part, the part that valued his life and his family, screamed at him to run, to turn around and go back to the farmhouse, to leave the figure alone and never look back. But another part of him, a darker, more primal part, felt an irresistible pull towards the figure, a powerful compulsion to obey its silent command. It was as if the figure was calling to something deep within him, something he had long suppressed, something he couldn't resist. He lowered the shotgun slightly, his grip loosening. He stared at the outstretched hand, mesmerized by its skeletal beauty. He felt an overwhelming desire to reach out and take it, to grasp it, to be drawn into the figure's world. He took a step forward, then hesitated. The fear was still there, a nagging voice in the back of his mind, warning him of the danger. He knew that this was a trap, that the figure was leading him towards something terrible. But the compulsion was too strong. He couldn't resist it. He took another step forward, and then another, his feet moving almost of their own accord. He was now only a few feet away from the figure, close enough to reach out and touch it. The air was thick with a strange, electric energy. He could feel the figure's gaze upon him, piercing and intense. He stared into the darkness beneath the figure's hat, searching for some sign, some clue, some explanation, but he found only emptiness, a void that seemed to swallow him whole. He reached out his hand, his fingers trembling. He was about to take the figure's hand, to surrender to the irresistible compulsion, when he heard a voice, faint but clear, calling his name, and that voice pulled him back from the void. The voice calling his name sliced through the eerie silence of the cornfield, snapping Caleb out of his trance. It was Sarah, her voice filled with terror. "Caleb, no, stop." The sound of her scream seemed to break the spell, shattering the irresistible compulsion that had been driving him forward. He blinked, his vision clearing, and he suddenly realized how close he was to the figure, how close he had come to surrendering to its will. He stumbled backward, his heart pounding in his chest, his mind reeling from the experience. The fear returned, stronger than ever, but it was now mixed with a profound sense of relief. He had been saved, pulled back from the brink of something terrible. He looked up and saw Sarah running towards him, her face pale and contorted with fear. She was screaming his name, her voice echoing through the cornfield. As she got closer, Caleb noticed something else. The figure was gone. It had vanished, disappeared into the corn stalks as if it had never been there at all. He looked around frantically, searching for any sign of its presence, but there was nothing. Only the rustling corn stalks and the fading light of the setting sun. Sarah reached him, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She threw her arms around him, clinging to him tightly. "Caleb, are you okay?" she cried. "What happened? What was it?" Caleb shook his head, unable to speak. He was still trying to process what had just happened, to make sense of the terrifying experience he had just endured. "I don't know, Sarah," he finally managed to say, his voice trembling. "I don't know what it was, but it's gone now." They stood there for a moment, clinging to each other, their bodies shaking with fear and relief. The sun had now fully set, and the cornfield was shrouded in darkness. Slowly, cautiously, they turned and walked back towards the farmhouse, leaving the empty cornfield behind. The figure was gone, but the memory of its presence, the chilling glimmer of recognition, would forever haunt their dreams. It was going to be a long time before he felt safe again, back in the farmhouse, with the doors locked. And the windows bolted. Caleb and Sarah tried to make sense of what had happened. The adrenaline slowly began to wear off, leaving them both exhausted and shaken. "We have to go back out there," Caleb said, his voice still trembling. "We have to see if there's anything left, any sign of it." Sarah hesitated. She was terrified of returning to the cornfield, but she knew that Caleb wouldn't rest until he had satisfied his curiosity. "Okay," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "But we're going together, and we're taking the shotgun." They ventured back into the cornfield, armed with the shotgun and a flashlight. The darkness was oppressive, and the rustling of the corn stalk seemed to amplify their fears. They searched the area where Caleb had confronted the figure, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. They looked for footprints, for any sign of disturbance, for anything that would explain what they had seen, but they found nothing. The corn stalks were undisturbed. The ground was smooth, and even that it was as if the figure had simply vanished into thin air, leaving no trace of its presence. They continued to search, venturing deeper into the cornfield, but they found nothing. There was no sign of the figure, no sign of anyone having been there at all. It was as if the encounter had been a figment of their imaginations, a shared hallucination fueled by fear and stress. Discouraged and defeated, they returned to the farmhouse. Caleb, still desperate for answers, decided to check the cameras. He hoped that maybe, just maybe, one of them had captured something, some clue that would explain what they had seen, but the cameras were still malfunctioning. The ones that had been pointed towards the figure displayed only static, while the others showed nothing but the swaying corn stalks. Caleb slammed his fist on the table in frustration. The cameras had failed them again, providing no evidence, no explanation, no closure. The mystery of the figure remained unsolved, a chilling enigma that would continue to haunt them. They were going to have to learn to live with it. In the days and weeks that followed, Caleb and Sarah slowly began to rebuild their lives. The memory of the figure in the cornfield lingered, a constant reminder of the terrifying experience they had shared, but they refused to let it consume them. Caleb was shaken by the encounter, deeply affected by the glimpse he had caught of the figure's face, the chilling glimmer of recognition he had seen in its eyes, but he was also strangely at peace that he had confronted his fear, faced the unknown, and emerged relatively unscathed. He started to focus on his farm again, tending to the neglected fields, repairing the broken fences, and servicing the long idle equipment. He found solace in the familiar rhythms of farm life, in the hard work and the tangible rewards. He spent more time with Sarah, cherishing their relationship, reaffirming their love. They talked about the figure, sharing their fears and their uncertainties. They realized that the experience had brought them closer together, strengthening their bond in ways they had never imagined. He still couldn't explain what they had seen, what they had experienced. He didn't know if it had been a ghost, a demon, a figment of their imaginations, or something else entirely, but he had come to accept that some mysteries are simply unexplainable, that some questions are destined to remain unanswered. He started sleeping better, the nightmares slowly fading. The cornfield no longer seemed as menacing. The sunsets no longer filled him with dread. He began to find beauty in the landscape again, a sense of peace in the solitude he still kept. The shotgun close at hand, just in case, but he no longer felt the same sense of fear, the same overwhelming anxiety. He had faced his demons, and he had survived. Life on the farm slowly returned to normal, or as close to normal as it could be after what they had experienced. The corn continued to grow, the seasons continued to change, and Caleb and Sarah continued to love and support each other. They started to become comfortable and laugh again, and that made them happy. Months passed, the corn was harvested, the fields lay fallow, and winter descended upon Nebraska, blanketing the landscape in a pristine layer of snow. The days were short and cold, the nights long and dark, but inside the farmhouse, Caleb and Sarah found warmth and comfort in each other's company. The figure in the cornfield was rarely spoken of, a shared secret buried deep within their hearts, but it was always there, a subtle presence that lingered in the air, a reminder of the terrifying mystery they had faced. One evening, as the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Caleb stood on his porch, looking out at the cornfield. The snow-covered ground sparkled in the fading light, creating a scene of breathtaking beauty that he saw nothing. The cornfield was empty, the landscape serene, but a subtle feeling lingered, a faint prickling on the back of his neck. A sense of being watched that he couldn't shake, the feeling that he was not alone. That he scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of movement, any hint of the figure's return, but there was nothing, only the vast expanse of the Nebraska prairie, stretching out to the endless sky. That he sighed, his breath misting in the cold air. That he knew that the mystery of the figure would never truly be solved, that it would forever remain a part of his life, a chilling enigma that he could never fully understand. That he thought about Thomas Miller, the farmer who had disappeared in the cornfields decades ago. That he wondered if Thomas had ever found peace, if his spirit still roamed the land, searching for a way to reclaim what he had lost. That he closed his eyes for a moment, offering a silent prayer for Thomas's soul, and for his own. That he was starting to feel like it was his turn soon. When he opened his eyes again, he saw Sarah standing in the doorway, her face etched with concern. She smiled at him, a warm, reassuring smile that chased away the shadows in his heart. That he smiled back, a faint, hesitant smile, perhaps a slight smile played on his lips, a subtle acknowledgement of the mystery that still lingered. Or perhaps a shadow of fear crossed his face, a fleeting reminder of the terrifying experience he had endured. The ending remained ambiguous, a testament to the enduring power of the unknown. That he was never sure if it was the end. The minivan, packed to the brim with boxes labeled "Kitchen," Emily's room, and Sarah's books, rumbled down the tree-lined streets of Havenwood. Sarah Harper, her eyes glued to the passing scenery, practically vibrated with excitement. Tom, her husband, gripped the steering wheel, a mixture of apprehension and resignation etched on his face. That eye in the back, Emily, their 15-year-old daughter, plugged in her earbuds, determined to shut out the entire experience. Havenwood, with its clapboard houses and antique shops, was a far cry from the manicured lawns and identical facades of their suburban development. That it was Sarah's dream made manifest. For years, she devoured books about historical architecture, local legends, and the intricate lives of those who came before. The cookie-cutter existence they'd built was comfortable, yes, but it lacked soul. When she stumbled upon the listing for the Blackwood House, a meticulously restored Victorian on the edge of town, she knew, with a certainty that bordered on obsession, that it was meant to be theirs. Tom, a pragmatic accountant, had needed convincing. That he saw only drafts, leaky roofs, and exorbitant heating bills where Sarah saw history whispering from every corner. That he argued for logic, for practicality, for staying put where they knew what to expect. But Sarah, with her infectious enthusiasm and unwavering belief, eventually wore him down. That he loved her, after all, even if he didn't quite understand her fascination with dusty old houses. Emily, predictably, was the most resistant, leaving her friends, her school, her entire life behind. For this, she saw the move as a personal affront, a deliberate attempt to ruin her social life. The Victorian, with its turrets and gables, its looming presence against the twilight sky, struck her as creepy and outdated. She imagined cobwebs in every corner and a distinct lack of Y-Fi. As they pulled up to the Blackwood House, Sarah gasped. The three-story structure, painted a stately gray with intricate white trim, was even more magnificent than the pictures had suggested. A wide porch wrapped around the front, adorned with ornate railings and gingerbread detailing. A circular turret rose from one corner, its pointed roof reaching towards the sky. The overgrown garden, a riot of roses, hydrangeas, and untamed vines, only added to the house's romantic, slightly gothic charm. "Isn't it incredible?" Sarah breathed, her eyes shining. Tom nodded, a grudging admiration creeping into his expression. "It's certainly something." Emily, still plugged into her music, rolled her eyes. Sarah jumped out of the minivan, her fingers itching to explore every nook and cranny. She imagined herself uncovering hidden diaries, tracing the footsteps of generations past, piecing together the story of the Blackwood family. She pictured herself hosting historical society meetings in the parlor, sharing her discoveries with fellow enthusiasts. This wasn't just a house, it was a portal to another time, a tangible link to the past. Tom, sighing, began unloading boxes. Emily remained slumped in the back seat, radiating teenage discontent. As Sarah approached the front door, a sudden gust of wind swept through the garden, rustling the leaves and sending a chill down her spine. For a fleeting moment, she felt a strange sense of unease, a prickling sensation at the back of her neck. She dismissed it as nerves, the excitement of finally realizing her dream. After all, what could possibly go wrong? The first few days at the Blackwood house were a whirlwind of unpacking, arranging furniture, and trying to establish a semblance of order amidst the chaos. Sunlight streamed through the tall, arched windows, illuminating the intricate woodwork and casting long shadows across the polished hardwood floors. The house, in its initial splendor, seemed to welcome them. Sarah reveled in the details, the delicate floral wallpaper in the parlor, the ornate fireplace mantels, the heavy oak doors that creaked with history. Tom, ever practical, focused on the structural aspects, inspecting the plumbing, the wiring, and the heating system. Emily, however, remained largely confined to her room, a spacious chamber on the second floor overlooking the overgrown garden, communicating with the outside world primarily through her phone. But beneath the surface of this initial charm, a subtle unease began to creep in. Small, inexplicable things started to happen. A book Sarah had left on the bedside table would be found on the floor in the morning. A set of keys Tom placed on the kitchen counter would inexplicably disappear, only to reappear later in a different location. The temperature in the hallway outside Emily's room seemed perpetually colder than the rest of the house, a distinct cold spot that sent shivers down your spine. Sarah initially dismissed these incidents as mere quirks of an old house, the settling of the foundation, the playful tricks of the light. Tom, ever the skeptic, attributed them to forgetfulness or drafts, but Emily, already predisposed to disliking the house, saw them as evidence of something far more sinister. One evening, while Sarah was preparing dinner, she felt a distinct sensation of being watched. She turned around, but the kitchen was empty. She peered out the window into the garden, but saw nothing. A shiver ran down her spine, and she quickened her pace, eager to finish her task and escape the unsettling feeling. Tom experienced his own unsettling moment while working in the basement, attempting to trace a mysterious leak. The basement, with its low ceilings and damp, earthy smell, was the only part of the house that hadn't been fully restored. As he crawled through the narrow space beneath the stairs, he heard a faint scraping sound, as if something were dragging across the floor. He shone his flashlight around, but saw nothing. He dismissed it as a rat, but the sound lingered in his mind, a discordant note in the otherwise peaceful atmosphere of the house. Emily, however, was the most affected. She claimed to see shadows flitting in the corners of her room, to hear whispers when she was alone. She complained of feeling a constant presence, a weight on her chest that made it difficult to breathe. She started having nightmares, vivid and disturbing dreams filled with shadowy figures and whispering voices. "It's just an old house, Emily," Sarah would reassure her, trying to maintain a calm facade. "It takes some getting used to." "It's not just an old house, Mom," Emily would retort, her voice trembling. "There's something wrong with this place. I can feel it." One afternoon, Emily was rummaging through a box of old photographs she had found in the attic. As she sifted through the faded images of stern-faced men and women in Victorian attire, she came across a picture that made her gasp. It was a portrait of a young girl with dark, piercing eyes and a melancholic expression. There was something about the girl's face, something familiar and unsettling, that sent a shiver down Emily's spine. On the back of the photograph, someone had scrawled a single word. In elegant cursive, Abigail. That night, Emily had the most vivid nightmare yet. She dreamt she was standing in the hallway outside her room, and the temperature plummeted. She could see her breath fogging in the air. A figure emerged from the shadows, a pale, gaunt girl with dark, piercing eyes. The girl reached out a hand towards Emily, and whispered a single word, "Help." Emily woke up screaming, her heart pounding in her chest. convinced that the girl from the photograph, Abigail, was trying to communicate with her. The unsettling incidents were escalating, and the initial charm of the Blackwood house was quickly fading, replaced by a growing sense of dread. The photograph of Abigail and the subsequent nightmare left Emily shaken. She shared her experience with her parents, but Tom, while concerned about her distress, remained skeptical. Sarah, however, was starting to waver. The unsettling incidents, combined with Emily's increasingly vivid descriptions of the girl in the photograph, were beginning to erode her initial enthusiasm. Then came the whispers that it started subtly, a faint murmur that barely registered against the backdrop of nighttime silence. At 3:17 a.m., precisely, a sound would permeate the house. A barely audible susurrus that seemed to emanate from within the walls themselves. The first night, Tom dismissed it as the wind whistling through the old window frames. Sarah, half asleep, thought it might be a distant train. Emily, however, was instantly alert. She recognized the sound from her nightmares. The whispers, faint and indistinct, but undeniably present. The following night, the whispers returned, again at precisely 3:17 a.m. This time, they were slightly louder, more discernible. Emily, wide awake and listening intently, could distinguish a faint, rhythmic pattern, like hushed voices engaged in conversation. She nudged her parents awake. "Do you hear that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Tom, groggy and irritable, listened for a moment. "Hear what?" "Just go back to sleep, Emily." Sarah, however, heard it too. A faint, almost imperceptible murmuring that seemed to be coming from the wall behind their bed. "I think I hear something," she said, her voice hushed. "It sounds like whispering." Tom, now fully awake, strained his ears that he could hear it too, a faint, indistinct sound that defied explanation. That he got out of bed and pressed his ear against the wall. "It's probably just the pipes," he muttered, unconvinced even to himself. But the whispers continued, night after night, always at the same time, 3:17 a.m. They grew progressively louder, clearer, more distinct. The family found themselves dreading the approach of that fateful hour. Sleep became a fragmented, anxious affair, punctuated by the unsettling murmur emanating from the walls. The content of the whispers remained unintelligible. They were like snippets of conversation, fragments of sentences, spoken in hushed, urgent tones. Sometimes, they sounded like a chorus of voices, a collective murmur. Other times, it was just a single voice, whispering secrets into the darkness. The atmosphere in the house grew increasingly tense. Tom, unable to explain the phenomenon, became irritable and withdrawn. Sarah, torn between her initial fascination and her growing fear, threw herself into researching the history of the Blackwood house, hoping to find some explanation for the strange occurrences. Emily, terrified and increasingly convinced that the whispers were connected to Abigail, started sleeping with the lights on. One morning, Sarah stumbled upon an old newspaper article in the town's historical archives that described a series of strange events that had plagued the Blackwood family in the late 19th century. Unexplained noises, objects moving on their own, and reports of whispered voices coming from within the walls. The article mentioned rumors of occult practices and a possible curse. As Sarah read the article, a chill ran down her spine. The whispers, she realized, were not a new phenomenon. They were a recurring event, a haunting echo from the house's troubled past. The time 3:17 a.m. was also mentioned in the article, pinpointing it as the exact time Abigail Blackwood passed away. The mystery deepened and Sarah was now on a quest to solve it. Armed with the chilling knowledge from the newspaper article, Sarah redoubled her efforts to understand the history of the Blackwood house and the source of the whispers. Tom, though still skeptical, could no longer deny the reality of the phenomenon. That he began researching soundproofing techniques, desperately seeking a logical explanation and a way to silence the unsettling murmur. Emily, meanwhile, felt a strange mix of terror and fascination. She was determined to uncover the truth behind the whispers, convinced that Abigail held the key. That night, Emily decided to take matters into her own hands. Using a sound recording app on her phone, she positioned the device near the wall in her room, Hoping to capture the whispers, she set an alarm for 3:15 a.m., ensuring she would be awake and ready when the voices began. As the clock ticked closer to the appointed hour, Emily's heart pounded in her chest. She lay in bed, listening intently, the silence of the house amplifying her anxiety. Then, precisely at 3:17 a.m., the whispers began, faint and indistinct. They emanated from the wall, a hushed murmur that sent shivers down her spine. She pressed record on her phone and held the device as close to the wall as possible. The next morning, after a fitful night of sleep, Emily eagerly retrieved the recording. She plugged her headphones into her phone and played back the audio. At first, all she heard was static and background noise, but then, as she adjusted the settings on the app, amplifying the sound and filtering out the extraneous noise, she began to discern something more. The whispers were there, faint but audible. They were indeed voices, speaking in hushed tones. Emily strained her ears, trying to decipher the words. She replayed the recording several times, slowing it down, amplifying it, focusing on individual sounds. Slowly, painstakingly, she began to make out fragments of sentences. The voices were speaking in a language that sounded almost archaic, but she could understand some of the words, and what she heard sent a chill to her very core. The voices were speaking their names. She heard her own name, Emily, whispered in a hushed, almost mournful tone. She heard her mother's name, Sarah, spoken with a mixture of longing and warning, and she heard her father's name, Tom, uttered with a distinct note of mockery. But the most disturbing thing was that the voices seemed to know things about them. She heard snippets of conversation that referenced private moments, personal secrets, things that only her family knew. It was as if the whispers were eavesdropping on their thoughts, their memories, their very lives. Emily rushed to her parents, her voice trembling with fear. She played them the recording, and they listened in stunned silence. As they heard their names whispered from the walls, a sense of dread washed over them. Tom, his skepticism finally shattered, stared at the wall in disbelief. Sarah, her face pale, clutched Emily's hand tightly. "They know us," Emily whispered, her eyes wide with terror. "They know our names, they know our secrets." The realization was chilling. The whispers were not just random noises, a ghostly echo from the past. They were intelligent, aware, and disturbingly familiar with the Harper family. The house was not just haunted, it was actively watching them, listening to them, and somehow, communicating with them through these unsettling whispers. The Blackwood house had revealed a terrifying new layer to its mystery, and the Harpers were trapped inside, with no idea what the whispers wanted or what they were capable of. The revelation that the whispers knew their names and secrets plunged the Harper family into a state of heightened anxiety. Every creak of the house, every shadow in the corner of their eyes, now seemed imbued with a sinister intent. They were constantly on edge, listening for the whispers, dreading the arrival of 3:17 a.m. Then, the whispers began to predict things. It started with small, seemingly insignificant events. One night, Emily overheard the whispers mentioning her lost bracelet, a silver chain she had misplaced weeks ago. The next morning, she found the bracelet tucked inside a teacup in the china cabinet, a place she would never have thought to look. Another night, the whispers spoke of a phone call Sarah would receive from an old friend she hadn't heard from in years. The following afternoon, Sarah received a call from that very friend, who was passing through Havenwood and wanted to meet up for coffee. These incidents, while minor in themselves, were deeply unsettling. They demonstrated that the whispers were not just aware of their present, they had some ability to foresee the future, however limited. The Harpers felt as though they were living in a play, with the whispers as the unseen playwright orchestrating their lives with subtle, unsettling precision. Emily was particularly unnerved. The whispers seemed to focus on her, predicting her actions, commenting on her thoughts. She felt like she was losing her privacy, her sense of self, as if the whispers were slowly taking over her mind. "They know what I'm going to do before I do it," she told her parents, her voice filled with fear. "It's like they're inside my head." Sarah, increasingly convinced that the whispers were a malevolent force, tried to shield Emily from their influence. She encouraged her to spend time outside the house, to reconnect with her friends online, to focus on anything that would distract her from the unsettling atmosphere. Tom, however, remained stubbornly skeptical. He attributed the predictions to coincidence, to chance occurrences that were being amplified by their heightened state of anxiety. He argued that they were simply noticing things they wouldn't have noticed otherwise, that their minds were playing tricks on them. "It's just our imaginations running wild," he insisted, trying to reassure himself as much as his family. "We're letting this house get to us that we need to be rational." But even Tom found it difficult to explain away all the coincidences. The whispers' predictions were becoming increasingly specific, increasingly accurate. One night, they spoke of a small accident that would befall their neighbor, Mrs. Davison, involving a sprained ankle and a rogue garden gnome. The next day, Mrs. Davison indeed sprained her ankle after tripping over a garden gnome. This incident, more than any other, shook Tom's skepticism. He could no longer deny that something extraordinary was happening in the Blackwood house. The whispers were not just a figment of their imaginations, they were a real, tangible force, capable of influencing events in the real world. The house was no longer just unsettling, it was actively dangerous. The Harpers were trapped in a nightmare, with the whispers as their tormentor, predicting their future, manipulating their lives, and slowly driving them to the brink of despair. Their fear mounted with each passing day, with each new prediction that came to pass. They were desperate to find a way to stop the whispers, to break free from the house's insidious influence, before it was too late. The escalating predictions and the growing sense of dread spurred Sarah to immerse herself completely in researching the history of the Blackwood house. She spent hours at the Havenwood Historical Society, poring over old documents, newspaper clippings, and genealogical records. She visited the local library, devouring books on Victorian history, folklore, and the occult. She even contacted distant relatives of the Blackwood family, hoping to glean some insight into their lives and the tragedies that had befallen them. What she discovered painted a disturbing picture of a family plagued by misfortune and shrouded in whispers of darkness. The Blackwoods had been prominent members of Havenwood society in the late 19th century, but their lives were marred by a series of tragic events. The patriarch, Samuel Blackwood, a wealthy industrialist, had lost his fortune in a series of unfortunate investments. His wife, Eleanor, had succumbed to a mysterious illness, wasting away despite the best medical care. Their eldest son, Charles, had died in a freak accident at the family's factory, but the most unsettling story revolved around their youngest daughter, Abigail. According to local legends, Abigail was a strange and withdrawn child, prone to fits of melancholy and prone to speaking of things she couldn't possibly know. Some whispered that she was clairvoyant, blessed with the ability to see into the future. Others claimed she was touched by something darker, that she was in league with unseen forces. The rumors of occult practices swirled around the Blackwood family. It was said that Samuel, desperate to restore his fortune and cure his wife's illness, had dabbled in the forbidden arts, seeking answers in ancient grimoires and performing strange rituals in the dead of night. It was also whispered that Eleanor, driven mad by grief and despair, had turned to spiritualism, attempting to contact her deceased son through seances and spirit boards. The whispers in the Blackwood house were said to have begun during Abigail's lifetime, growing louder and more menacing as she grew older. Some believed that Abigail was the source of the whispers, that she was somehow channeling the voices of the dead or the whispers of otherworldly entities. Others claimed that the whispers were a manifestation of the family's dark secrets, a haunting echo of their tragic past. Abigail's own death was shrouded in mystery. She died at the age of 12, under circumstances that were never fully explained. Some said she succumbed to a wasting illness, similar to her mother. Others whispered that she had taken her own life, driven mad by the voices in her head. The official cause of death was listed as consumption, but many believed that something far more sinister had occurred. After Abigail's death, the Blackwood family abandoned the house, leaving it to decay and ruin. It remained vacant for decades, acquiring a reputation as a haunted place, a repository of dark secrets and tragic memories. As Sarah pieced together the story of the Blackwood family, she felt a growing sense of unease. The parallels between their lives and the Harpers' current situation were chilling. The whispers, the predictions, the sense of being watched, it was all eerily similar to what the Blackwoods had experienced. Sarah feared that the Harpers were doomed to repeat the Blackwoods' tragic fate, that they were caught in a cycle of darkness that they could not escape. The house's history had become a terrifying prophecy, and she needed to find a way to change the future. Sarah's deepening dive into the Blackwood history uncovered more than just tragic events and local legends. She unearthed a family secret, carefully guarded and whispered only in hushed tones over the years. Abigail Blackwood wasn't just a melancholy child who died young. She was believed to possess a unique and unsettling gift. The term clairvoyant was often used, but the descriptions of Abigail's abilities went far beyond simple foresight. She was said to be able to see things that were hidden from others, to know things that she couldn't possibly have learned through normal means. She could describe events happening miles away, predict the thoughts of others, and even communicate with the deceased, or so some claimed. However, Abigail's gift was also described as a curse. She was often plagued by visions, tormented by voices, and overwhelmed by emotions that weren't her own. She was said to be fragile and easily influenced, vulnerable to forces beyond her control. Some believed that she wasn't truly clairvoyant, but rather possessed by a spirit or entity that used her as a conduit. The circumstances surrounding Abigail's death remained shrouded in mystery, but Sarah discovered a few tantalizing clues that suggested something far more sinister than consumption. An old diary entry from a distant relative mentioned that Abigail had become increasingly agitated and withdrawn in the weeks leading up to her death, claiming that the voices in her head were growing louder and more demanding. The diary also hinted at a struggle, a desperate attempt to silence the voices, to break free from their influence. Sarah also found a faded letter, tucked away in a dusty box, written by Abigail's governess to a close friend. In the letter, the governess expressed her growing concern for Abigail's well-being, describing her as a vessel filled with darkness, and fearing that she was on the verge of being consumed by something evil. The governess also mentioned strange occurrences in the house, objects moving on their own, unexplained noises, and a chilling sense of being watched. The letter ended abruptly, with a cryptic warning: "I fear that we are all in danger. This house is not safe. We must find a way to escape before it's too late." The governess disappeared shortly after writing the letter, and her fate remains unknown. These discoveries solidified Sarah's belief that Abigail was the key to understanding the mysteries of the Blackwood house. She was convinced that Abigail's gift, whatever it may have been, had somehow opened a door to another realm, unleashing a malevolent force that continued to haunt the house generations later. The more Sarah learned about Abigail, the more she feared for Emily. She saw disturbing parallels between the two girls, their sensitivity, their vulnerability, their connection to the whispers. She worried that Emily was being targeted, that she was being groomed to become the next Abigail, the next vessel for the darkness that resided within the Blackwood house. Sarah realized she needed to protect her daughter and uncover the full truth about Abigail. She needed to find a way to close the door that Abigail had opened, to silence the whispers, and to break the cycle of tragedy that had plagued the Blackwood family for so long. The stakes were higher than ever, and the fate of her family hung in the balance. Sarah's fears were soon confirmed. The whispers, which had previously been a general murmur directed at the entire family, began to focus almost exclusively on Emily. The 3:17 a.m. murmur intensified, becoming a relentless barrage of voices that seemed to claw at her sanity. The whispers became more frequent, no longer confined to the nightly hour. They echoed in her mind during the day, a constant, insidious presence that chipped away at her sense of self. They whispered doubts, fears, and insecurities, preying on her deepest vulnerabilities. What was even more disturbing was that the whispers began to reveal secrets about Emily's past, things that only she knew. They spoke of a childhood embarrassment, a hidden crush, a moment of weakness that she had long tried to forget. The whispers knew her innermost thoughts, her darkest secrets, and they used them against her, twisting them into weapons of psychological torment. "Remember that time you lied to your best friend?" the whispers would murmur. "She still doesn't trust you, you know that you're a terrible person. He'll never like you," they'd whisper, referring to a boy Emily had a crush on. "You're not pretty enough, not smart enough, not interesting enough." Emily tried to block out the whispers, to shut them out of her mind, but they were relentless. They followed her everywhere, a constant reminder of her flaws, her failures, her deepest fears. Then, the whispers began to make disturbing predictions about her future. They spoke of a dark path ahead, a future filled with pain, loneliness, and despair. They predicted that she would lose her friends, that she would fail in school, that she would never find happiness. "You're destined for darkness, Emily," the whispers would murmur. "You're just like Abigail, that you're a vessel for something evil." These predictions terrified Emily. She felt like she was losing control of her life, that she was being manipulated by unseen forces, that her fate was already sealed. She became withdrawn and isolated, afraid to speak, afraid to act, afraid to even think, lest the whispers use her thoughts against her. Sarah and Tom watched in horror as Emily spiraled deeper into despair. They tried to reassure her, to comfort her, to convince her that the whispers were just voices, that they had no power over her, but their words seemed to have little effect. Emily was convinced that the whispers were real, that they were telling the truth, that she was doomed. Sarah, desperate to protect her daughter, sought out a paranormal investigator, hoping to find some way to combat the whispers and break their hold on Emily. Tom, though still skeptical, agreed to participate, willing to try anything to save his daughter from the darkness that was consuming her. The family was running out of time, and the whispers were closing in, threatening to claim Emily as their own. The Blackwood house was tightening its grip, and the Harpers were trapped in a battle for Emily's soul. Watching Emily wither under the relentless assault of the whispers finally shattered Tom's remaining skepticism. The logical, pragmatic accountant could no longer deny the reality of the supernatural forces at play in the Blackwood house, that he saw the terror in his daughter's eyes, the despair that clouded her spirit, and he knew that he had to do something, anything, to save her. He swallowed his pride and admitted to Sarah that she had been right all along. The house was not just old and quirky, it was haunted, possessed, something far beyond his comprehension. That he confessed that he had been afraid to believe, afraid to confront the unknown, but that he could no longer afford to be skeptical. His daughter's life was at stake. With Sarah's encouragement, Tom took the initiative and contacted a paranormal investigator named Eleanor Vance. Eleanor was a renowned expert in the field, with years of experience investigating haunted houses and dealing with supernatural phenomena. She was skeptical but open-minded, a scientist who approached the paranormal with a blend of curiosity and caution. Eleanor arrived at the Blackwood house equipped with an array of instruments, EMF readers, thermal cameras, and audio recorders, designed to detect and measure paranormal activity. She spent hours exploring the house, taking readings, and asking questions about the family's experiences. She interviewed Sarah, Tom, and Emily, carefully documenting their accounts of the whispers, the predictions, and the unsettling incidents. After her initial investigation, Eleanor shared her preliminary findings with the Harpers. She explained that the Blackwood house appeared to be a focal point for paranormal activity, a place where the veil between worlds was thin. She suggested that the house might be saturated with residual energy, a kind of ghostly echo of past events that continue to reverberate through time. However, Eleanor also cautioned that the activity in the house might be more than just residual energy. She sensed a darker presence, a malevolent entity that seemed to be actively targeting Emily. She theorized that Abigail Blackwood, with her supposed clairvoyant abilities, may have inadvertently opened a doorway to this entity, allowing it to enter the house and exert its influence. "This house is not just haunted," Eleanor explained, her voice grave. "It's infested. There's something here that wants to harm your daughter." Eleanor suggested a course of action that involved further investigation, including a seance to attempt to communicate with the entity and identify its intentions. She also recommended cleansing the house, using rituals and symbols to dispel the negative energy and protect the family from harm. Tom, desperate to save Emily, agreed to Eleanor's plan without hesitation that he was willing to try anything, no matter how strange or improbable, to break the Whisper's hold on his daughter and restore peace to their home. That he had come to believe that the Blackwood house was not just a house, it was a battleground, and the fate of his family hung in the balance. The rational accountant had become a desperate father, ready to confront the supernatural forces that threatened to destroy everything he held dear. The seance was held in the Blackwood house's parlor, the room where Abigail was said to have spent most of her time. Eleanor Vance meticulously prepared the space, arranging candles in a circle, scattering salt around the perimeter, and placing a vintage spirit board on a small table in the center of the room. Sarah, Tom, and Emily sat around the table, their hands resting lightly on the planchette, a small, heart-shaped piece of wood used to communicate with spirits. Eleanor began the ritual, chanting in a low, resonant voice, invoking the spirits of the house and calling for any entities present to reveal themselves. The room grew colder, a palpable chill that sent shivers down their spines. The candles flickered erratically, casting dancing shadows on the walls. A faint breeze stirred the air, rustling the curtains and carrying the scent of dust and decay. At first, nothing happened. The planchette remained motionless, and the room remained silent, save for Eleanor's chanting. Tom, ever the skeptic, began to doubt the efficacy of the ritual, but then, suddenly, the planchette began to move, slowly, hesitantly. It slid across the surface of the spirit board, spelling out letters, forming words. The first message was simple: Abigail. Emily gasped, her eyes widening in fear. The Whispers had always seemed connected to Abigail, but this was the first time she had felt her presence so directly. Eleanor continued the session, asking questions, probing for information. The planchette responded, spelling out cryptic messages about Abigail's life, her gift, and the darkness that had consumed her. The messages were fragmented and confusing, but they painted a disturbing picture of a young girl tormented by unseen forces, driven to the brink of madness. Then, the messages took a darker turn. The planchette began to spell out threats, directed at Emily. "She is mine," the planchette spelled out. "I will claim her. She will be like Abigail." Emily screamed, recoiling from the table. The whispers in her head intensified, becoming a deafening cacophony of voices. She felt a surge of negative energy, a wave of darkness that threatened to overwhelm her. Eleanor, sensing the danger, tried to end the seance, but it was too late. The room began to shake, the candles were extinguished, and the air crackled with static electricity. The spirit board flew off the table, shattering against the wall. The whispers became a roar, a chorus of voices filled with malice and rage. A dark presence filled the room, a palpable sense of evil that seemed to suffocate the air. Eleanor screamed a banishing incantation, but it had no effect. The presence was too strong, too powerful. Suddenly, Emily began to levitate. Her body rose slowly into the air, her eyes rolling back in her head. The whispers seemed to emanate from her, a torrent of voices that echoed through the house. "I am here," Emily's voice boomed, but it was not her voice. It was deeper, more resonant, filled with a chilling power. "I have returned." The seance had backfired, unleashing a darker presence than they could have ever imagined. The entity, linked to Abigail Blackwood's death, had used the seance as an opportunity to strengthen its hold on the house and claim Emily as its own. The Harpers were now facing a force far more dangerous than they had ever anticipated, and their fight for survival had just become a desperate battle against pure evil. With Emily now possessed, the house pulsed with a palpable darkness. Eleanor, though shaken by the disastrous seance, remained determined to help the Harpers. She explained that the entity was incredibly powerful, and exorcising it would be a dangerous and difficult task. However, she believed that understanding its origins and its connection to Abigail Blackwood was crucial to finding a way to defeat it. As Emily remained in a trance-like state, the entity used her as a mouthpiece, taunting Sarah and Tom with cryptic messages and fragmented visions, through these glimpses into the past. And the amplified whispers that now echoed throughout the house, the truth about Abigail Blackwood began to emerge. The long-held belief that Abigail was clairvoyant was a lie, a carefully constructed deception perpetuated by the entity itself. Abigail wasn't gifted, she was possessed. From a young age, she had been manipulated and controlled by the malevolent entity, which had used her as a conduit to influence events and sow chaos within the Blackwood family. The entity had whispered in her ear, feeding her lies, twisting her perceptions, and driving her to the brink of madness. It had used her gift to gain power and influence, preying on the fears and insecurities of those around her. It had orchestrated the tragedies that had befallen the Blackwood family, reveling in their suffering and despair. Abigail had fought against the entity's control, desperately trying to break free from its grasp. But she was too young, too vulnerable, too easily manipulated. The entity had slowly, methodically, broken her spirit, until she was nothing more than a puppet, a vessel for its evil. Her death, once shrouded in mystery, was now revealed to be a carefully orchestrated act of self-preservation. Abigail, realizing that she could no longer resist the entity's influence, had taken her own life to prevent it from fully consuming her and using her to unleash even greater darkness upon the world. But even in death, Abigail had failed to escape the entity's grasp. It remained trapped within the walls of the Blackwood house, bound to the place where it had first gained power, waiting for another opportunity to break free and unleash its evil upon the world. The Harpers now understood the true nature of the threat they faced. They were not just dealing with a haunting or a ghost, they were battling a powerful, ancient entity that had been manipulating events for. The revelation of Abigail's true fate cast a chilling light on the entity's intentions for Emily. Eleanor explained that the entity saw Emily as a potential new vessel, a chance to escape its confinement within the walls of the Blackwood house and once again exert its influence upon the world. The whispers, which had initially seemed like random noises or ghostly echoes, were, in fact, a carefully orchestrated campaign of psychological manipulation, designed to weaken Emily's will and prepare her for possession. The entity had been preying on her insecurities, exploiting her vulnerabilities, and isolating her from her family and friends, all in an effort to break her spirit and make her susceptible to its influence. The entity had chosen Emily for several reasons. Like Abigail, she was sensitive and impressionable, with a strong imagination and a tendency towards introspection. She was also an outsider, a newcomer to Havenwood, struggling to fit in and find her place. These qualities made her particularly vulnerable to the entity's manipulation. Furthermore, Emily possessed a latent psychic ability, a sensitivity to the supernatural that made her a prime target for possession. The entity had sensed this ability from the moment the Harpers had entered the Blackwood house, and it had been patiently grooming her, preparing her to become its next host. The whispers, Eleanor explained, were a form of psychic assault, designed to erode Emily's mental defenses and create an opening for the entity to enter her mind. The entity had been feeding her lies, planting seeds of doubt, and twisting her perceptions, all in an effort to break down her resistance and make her more receptive to its influence. The predictions, too, were part of the entity's plan. By foretelling future events, the entity had sought to convince Emily that she was powerless, that her fate was predetermined, and that resistance was futile. It had been trying to convince her that she was destined to become just like Abigail, a vessel for darkness, a puppet of evil. The possession itself was the culmination of this long and insidious campaign. By unleashing its full power during the seance, the entity had overwhelmed Emily's will and taken control of her body, turning her into a living puppet, a tool for its malevolent purposes. Now, with Emily possessed, the entity was stronger than ever, its power amplified by her physical presence. It could move freely within the house, manipulate objects, and even influence the thoughts and emotions of those around her. It was using Emily to spread fear, sow discord, and create an atmosphere of chaos and despair. The Harpers realized that they were facing a formidable enemy, an entity that had been planning this moment for. Eleanor, despite the danger, remained committed to helping the Harpers. She knew that the entity would attempt to fully possess Emily at the next 3:17 a.m., the hour of Abigail's death and the entity's strongest point of influence. She devised a plan to confront the entity and attempt to sever its connection to Emily, drawing upon her knowledge of occult lore and the information gleaned from Sarah's research. The plan involved creating a protective circle around Emily, using salt, iron, and various symbols of protection. They would then recite a banishing incantation, drawn from an ancient grimoire, designed to weaken the entity and force it to release its hold on Emily. The incantation had to be recited with unwavering conviction and a pure heart. As the clock ticked closer to 3:17 a.m., the tension in the Blackwood house was almost unbearable. Emily, still possessed, lay in her bed, her eyes closed, her breathing shallow. The entity used her as a puppet, whispering threats and taunts, trying to intimidate Sarah and Tom and break their resolve. Eleanor, Sarah, and Tom gathered in Emily's room, their faces grim, their hearts pounding in their chests. They drew the protective circle around Emily's bed, carefully placing each symbol and reciting the appropriate prayers. They felt the air grow colder, the presence of the entity growing stronger. As the clock struck 3:17 a.m., the room plunged into darkness. The candles flickered and died, and a wave of intense cold swept through the room. Emily's body began to convulse, and her voice, distorted by the entity, filled the air with a terrifying scream. "You cannot stop me," the entity shrieked. "She is mine now. I will break free, and I will unleash my wrath upon this world." Eleanor, Sarah, and Tom began to recite the banishing incantation, their voices trembling but resolute. The words of the incantation seemed to vibrate through the room, challenging the entity's power and asserting their will. The entity fought back, using Emily's body to attack them. She thrashed and screamed, her eyes glowing with an unholy light. She levitated off the bed, her body contorting into unnatural shapes. Tom, remembering a detail from Sarah's research, grabbed a silver locket that had belonged to Abigail and pressed it against Emily's chest. The entity shrieked in pain, its power weakened by the touch of the locket, a symbol of Abigail's resistance. Sarah, drawing upon her love for her daughter and her knowledge of the Blackwood family history, spoke directly to Emily, appealing to her inner spirit, urging her to fight back against the entity's control. "Emily, I know you're in there," Sarah cried, her voice filled with emotion. "You're stronger than this, you can fight it. You're not like Abigail, you're Emily Harper, and you're loved. Don't let it control you." Her words seemed to reach Emily. For a fleeting moment, her eyes flickered open, and a glimmer of recognition shone within them. She gasped, her body relaxing slightly. "Mom," she whispered, her voice weak but clear. The entity roared in frustration, its power waning. It tightened its grip on Emily, trying to silence her, to regain control. Eleanor, sensing the opportunity, intensified the incantation, her voice rising in power and conviction. The symbols of protection glowed with a faint light, and a wave of energy pulsed through the room. Tom held the locket firmly against Emily's chest, his eyes locked on hers, offering her his strength and support. The battle raged on. A desperate struggle between good and evil, love and darkness, the fate of Emily Harper, and perhaps the fate of the world, hung in the balance. Sarah's heartfelt plea and Tom's unwavering support, combined with Eleanor's powerful incantation, created a chink in the entity's armor. Emily, briefly freed from the entity's control, gasped for air, her eyes filled with terror. "Help me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's too strong." Eleanor realized that they needed more than just a banishing incantation to defeat the entity. They needed to sever its connection to the house, to break the cycle of possession and tragedy that had plagued the Blackwood family for generations. remembering a passage from one of the occult texts she had studied, Eleanor realized that there was a specific ritual, a counter-curse, that could be used to disrupt the entity's hold on the house. The ritual involved using a personal belonging of Abigail Blackwood, something that had been imbued with her essence, to create a barrier against the entity's influence. The silver locket, which Tom was still holding against Emily's chest, was the key. According to the text, the locket had been a gift from Abigail's mother, a symbol of her love and protection. That it was said to possess a residual energy that could be used to ward off evil. Eleanor instructed Sarah and Tom to place the locket in the center of the parlor, the room where Abigail had spent most of her time and where the seance had been conducted. They were to then recite a specific prayer, a plea for Abigail's spirit to help them break free from the entity's grasp. As Sarah and Tom carried out Eleanor's instructions, Emily, still struggling against the entity's control, began to speak in tongues, reciting a series of bizarre phrases and incantations. The house shook, the windows rattled, and the air grew thick with static electricity when Sarah and Tom placed the locket in the center of the parlor and began to recite the prayer. A wave of energy surged through the house. The whispers, which had been a constant presence, suddenly fell silent. The darkness that had been clinging to the walls began to dissipate. Emily's body convulsed violently, and she screamed in agony. The entity, sensing that its power was waning, fought back with all its might. It tried to break free from Emily's body, to escape into the walls of the house, but the locket, acting as a conduit for Abigail's spirit, created a barrier that prevented the entity from escaping. It was trapped, its power diminishing with each passing moment. Eleanor, sensing that the tide had turned, intensified the banishing incantation, her voice rising in power and conviction. The symbols of protection glowed brightly, and a wave of energy pulsed through the house, driving back the darkness and forcing the entity to retreat. With the entity trapped and its power waning, Eleanor unleashed the full force of the banishing incantation. The words of the incantation resonated through the house, driving back the darkness and forcing the entity to retreat. Emily's body went limp, and she collapsed onto the bed, unconscious but free from the entity's control. The whispers ceased, the darkness dissipated, and the Blackwood house fell silent for the first time in decades. Eleanor, exhausted but relieved, confirmed that the entity had been banished, or at least weakened significantly. She explained that it might still linger within the walls of the house, but its power was greatly diminished, and it would no longer be able to harm the Harpers. As dawn broke over Havenwood, casting a pale light through the windows of the Blackwood house, the Harpers surveyed the aftermath of their ordeal. The parlor was in disarray, the furniture overturned, the spirit board shattered, and the air thick with the scent of ozone and fear. Emily, still weak and shaken, slowly regained consciousness. She remembered nothing of her possession, but she felt a profound sense of relief, as if a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. The whispers were gone, and she felt like herself again. Perhaps for the first time since they had moved into the house, the Harpers were forever changed by their experience. They had faced unimaginable horrors, confronted supernatural forces, and battled for their survival. They had learned the true meaning of family, the power of love, and the importance of facing their fears. The question remained, what to do with the Blackwood house. The house had been the source of their torment, but it was also a part of their history, a place where they had faced their greatest challenges and emerged stronger than ever. Sarah, who had initially been so enamored with the house's history, now viewed it with a mixture of fear and fascination. She had uncovered its dark secrets, witnessed its malevolent power, and fought to protect her family from its influence. She had a newfound respect for the mysteries of the past, but also a deep understanding of the dangers that they could hold. Tom, who had once been skeptical of the supernatural, was now a firm believer in the unseen forces that shaped their world. He had witnessed the power of evil, the resilience of the human spirit, and the importance of protecting those he loved. Emily, who had initially hated the house, now felt a strange connection to it. She had faced her deepest fears within its walls, and she had emerged stronger and more. The Hotel California. The digital readout on the Greyhound flickered to 3:03 p.m. as the bus wheezed to a halt near Pershing Square. Sarah hefted her backpack, the strap biting into her skin, and descended onto the stained concrete. Los Angeles, the very air seemed altered, a thick, sluggish miasma of exhaust fumes and indefinable staleness. Before her rose the Cecil Hotel. Its dilapidated grandeur was immediately evident. A faded monument battling against Skid Row's relentless encroachment. The once gleaming facade wore a coat of grime, several windows sealed off with plywood, lending it the blank, unnerving stare of a skull. Even at this remove, she felt the palpable weight of its past, a chronicle of brutality, addiction, and utter despair. Serial killers had found refuge within its walls, suicides had stained the pavement, overdoses had choked its rooms. Sarah forced herself to shrug off the disquiet that prickled her skin. She was here for a purpose. Elisa Lam, the case had obsessed her for weeks, the chilling elevator surveillance replaying endlessly in her mind. She needed to grasp it, to truly understand. She needed first-hand experience. She crossed the street, the cacophony of traffic a jarring disruption to the eerie stillness emanating from the hotel. Approaching the entrance, she noticed the failing neon sign, the "C" in Cecil sputtering erratically before succumbing to darkness. The lobby was cloaked in shadow, a stark contrast to the radiant California sunshine. The air held the cloying aroma of stale cigarettes mingled with a medicinal tang that a lone ceiling fan spun listlessly, offering scant relief from the oppressive heat. Ornate details, though ravaged by time, hinted at a more opulent past. Dulled brass fixtures, threadbare velvet furnishings, and a reception desk marred by a network of cracks in its marble surface. Behind the desk stood a man as world-weary as the edifice itself. His name tag identified him as Miguel Alvarez. His coffee-colored eyes were bloodshot and bore a profound sadness that he offered no greeting, merely arched a tired brow in her direction. "I have a reservation," Sarah said, striving for a composure she didn't quite possess. "Chen, Sarah Chen." Miguel raked a hand through his receding hairline and sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the sorrow of the entire building. That he tapped at the keys of an archaic computer, its screen shimmering with static. "Yeah, Chen, room 314. He slid a registration form and a pen across the countertop. As Sarah completed the form, Miguel's uneasy demeanor caught her attention. That he kept darting furtive glances toward the lobby entrance, his fingers drumming an anxious rhythm on the desk. That he seemed agitated, on edge. "Is everything all right?" Sarah ventured, her voice hushed. Miguel flinched, his eyes widening almost imperceptibly. "Everything's fine, just busy." He evaded her gaze, toying with a cluster of room keys. Sarah hesitated, uncertain how far to probe. She sensed he was concealing something, a secret he was unwilling to share. Deciding to defer, she finished the form and returned it to him. That he gave her a key attached to a weighty, corroded keychain. "Third floor. Elevators around the corner." He gestured vaguely towards a gloomy corridor. As Sarah turned to leave, Miguel cleared his throat. "Miss Chen," he murmured, his voice strained and hesitant, "be careful." Sarah paused, pivoting back to face him. "Careful of what?" He shrugged, his gaze fixated on the floor. "Just, be careful." He offered no further explanation. The elevator proved even more unsettling than the lobby, cramped and claustrophobic. It was illuminated by a dim, stuttering light. The walls were defaced with graffiti, a palimpsest of names, dates, and crude drawings. Sarah pressed the button for the third floor, and the elevator lurched upward with a groan that mimicked a dying beast. As she ascended, a sensation of being watched crept over her. The air within the car felt thick and dense, almost tangible. She caught her reflection in the scratched metal doors, her own face appearing wan and strained. The elevator doors grated open on the third floor with a jarring clang. The hallway stretched long and shadowed, lit only by the sickly flicker of fluorescent tubes. The air hung still and heavy, imbued with the combined sense of dust and moldering decay. Room 314 was located halfway down the corridor. The door, painted a listless brown, bore a number that was barely discernible, etched into the wood with crude strokes. Sarah hesitated, Her hand hovering over the cold doorknob, taking a steadying breath, she inserted the key. The room was small and sparsely decorated. A narrow bed, draped with a worn blanket, stood against one wall. A rickety table and chair occupied a corner. Illumination came solely from a bare bulb suspended from the ceiling. Sarah tossed her backpack onto the floor and crossed to the window, drawing back the dingy curtains. She gazed out at the cityscape. The view was a tableau of urban bleakness, rooftops, fire escapes, and a web of power lines crisscrossing the sky. She trailed her fingers along the windowsill, feeling the coarse layer of grime. This was it, the starting point of her investigation, the place where Elisa Lamb had spent her final days. Suddenly, a sharp, percussive banging reverberated from the hallway. Sarah recoiled, startled. She strained to identify the source. It sounded like someone was hammering on a door. With desperate, frantic force, she crept to the door and pressed her ear against the aged wood. The banging persisted, punctuated by muffled shouts and distressed cries. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. Something was unfolding. She eased the door open a fraction and peered into the hallway. A few doors down, a woman was attacking a door with her fists, screaming with raw hysteria. Sarah couldn't decipher the words, but the tone resonated with desperation and abject terror. Other residents began to emerge from their rooms, their faces etched with apprehension and morbid curiosity. The hallway swiftly filled with people, their voices hushed in speculation and unease. A knot of dread tightened in Sarah's stomach. She had been here only moments. Yet the Cecil Hotel was already living up to its infamous reputation. She closed the door, leaning against it, her breath coming in shallow gasps. This was going to be far more complex than she had anticipated. This had the distinct tang of danger. Her gaze swept across the room, meticulously cataloging every corner, every shadow. She was alone, in a strange and unnerving place, surrounded by secrets and unresolved questions, but she was resolute in her quest for truth. She was determined to unravel the riddle of Elisa Lamb, even if it meant confronting the darkness that festered within the walls of the Cecil Hotel elevator enigma. The stale air in room 610 clung to Sarah like a damp shroud. She'd wrestled the window open, but all that brought in was the low hum of Los Angeles traffic and a faint, acrid smell that stung her nostrils. Not exactly the crisp scent of revelation she'd hoped for. She arranged her tools on the scarred desk: laptop, notepad, digital recorder, and a thermos of lukewarm coffee she'd grabbed from a nearby deli. The room itself was depressingly neutral: beige walls, a faded floral bedspread, and a crucifix hanging crookedly above the headboard. A silent judgment, perhaps. The Elisa Lamb case files glared back at her from the laptop screen: news articles, forum threads, amateur sleuth videos, a digital tapestry woven with speculation and grief. Sarah clicked through them, her fingers tracing the grainy images of Elisa. A young woman with wide, expressive eyes, swallowed by the vortex of the Cecil. Then came the elevator footage. Sarah held her breath, the familiar unease tightening its grip. She'd watched it countless times before, but viewing it here, within the Cecil's walls, amplified the unsettling quality. Elisa entering the elevator, pressing multiple buttons, peering out, stepping back, gesturing with her hands in a way that seemed both frantic and playful, the doors refusing to close. A performance for an unseen audience, a desperate plea, or the tragic unraveling of a troubled mind. Each viewing was a fresh puzzle. Sarah zoomed in on Elisa's face, searching for clues in her expression: fear, confusion, perhaps playfulness. The inconsistency was maddening. She opened a new document and began typing, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Possible scenarios based on elevator footage. Psychotic episode, unlikely, given the seemingly purposeful actions. No evidence of disorientation beyond the erratic behavior. Drug-induced state, possible, but toxicology reports were inconclusive. Playing a game, seemingly childish behavior, but why, and with whom? Hiding from someone, most compelling theory. The gestures could indicate an attempt to evade an unseen pursuer. The last one resonated the most. Hiding from whom and why? She cross-referenced the police reports, searching for any mention of suspicious individuals seen in the hotel around the time of Elisa's disappearance. Nothing concrete, just vague descriptions and unsubstantiated claims. The police investigation, from what she could gather, had been hampered by conflicting witness testimonies and the hotel's own labyrinthine layout. Sarah leaned back in her chair, the weight of the unanswered questions pressing down on her. The room felt colder now, the shadows lengthening as dusk crept in. The hum of the city outside seemed to deepen, morphing into a low, mournful drone. She scrolled through the comments section of a true crime forum, the digital voices a cacophony of opinions and accusations. Some blamed the hotel's dark history, citing the numerous suicides and violent crimes that had occurred within its walls. Others pointed to a possible cover-up, suggesting that the police had deliberately suppressed evidence to protect the hotel's reputation. Still others leaned into the paranormal, whispering about restless spirits and malevolent energies. Sarah dismissed the supernatural claims as sensationalism, but she couldn't ignore the persistent undercurrent of unease that ran through the online discussions. The Cecil had a reputation, and reputations, however exaggerated, often stemmed from a grain of truth. A sudden creak from the hallway outside made her jump. She held her breath, listening intently. Silence, just the muffled sounds of the hotel settling. Or was it? She grabbed her digital recorder and pressed the record button, her heart pounding in her chest. The silence stretched, amplifying the tension. Then, a faint scratching sound, like fingernails dragging against a wall. It was coming from the room next door. Sarah crept to the door and pressed her ear against the cool wood. The scratching continued, followed by a low, guttural moan. Fear prickled at the back of her neck. Was it another guest, or something else? She hesitated, her hand hovering over the doorknob. Should she investigate, or was she already letting her imagination run wild? Succumbing to the Cecil's dark allure, the moaning intensified, morphing into a series of choked sobs. Sarah couldn't ignore it. Whatever was happening next door, someone was in distress. She took a deep breath and reached for the doorknob, ready to confront whatever awaited her on the other side. Whispers from the past. The door to the maintenance area was wedged open by a rusty toolbox, revealing a dimly lit space crammed with spare parts, discarded furniture, and the pervasive scent of oil and dust. Sarah found Miguel hunched over a sputtering coffee maker, his face etched with a weariness that seemed older than his years. "Miguel?" she asked, her voice echoing slightly in the cluttered room. "Got a minute?" He straightened, his dark eyes flickering with a mixture of surprise and resignation. "Miss Chen, right? Something I can help you with?" He gestured to a rickety chair beside a workbench. "Have a seat, though I can't promise it's comfortable." Sarah perched on the edge of the chair, trying not to inhale too deeply. The air felt thick with untold stories, with the residue of countless repairs and forgotten incidents. "I was hoping to ask you a few questions about the hotel," she said, pulling out her notebook. Miguel sighed, pouring himself a cup of coffee that looked suspiciously like motor oil. "The Cecil has a lot of stories, Miss Chen, not all of them good." "I've heard," she replied, flipping open her notebook to a fresh page. "I'm particularly interested in anything unusual you might have experienced here." He took a long sip of his coffee, his gaze drifting towards a cobweb-laden corner. "Unusual? This whole place is unusual. It's soaked in history, bad history, mostly. You know about the suicides, the murders. Richard Ramirez stayed here, you know, the Night Stalker." Sarah nodded, scribbling notes. "I do, but I'm interested in things that might not be so easily explained, things that might defy logic." Miguel chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Logic left this building a long time ago, Miss Chen. Now it's just echoes and whispers." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. "You feel it, don't you? The weight of the place. It's not just the plumbing that's messed up in this hotel." Sarah felt a shiver crawl down her spine, despite the stuffy air. "I've noticed a certain atmosphere," she admitted. "Have you ever seen anything, heard anything?" Miguel hesitated, running a hand over his grizzled chin. "I've been here a long time, Miss Chen, seen things, heard things, things I can't explain, doors opening and closing on their own, lights flickering when the power's fine, voices when there's no one around." "Voices?" Sarah pressed, her pen poised over her notebook. "What kind of voices?" "Sometimes, whispers, faint, like someone trying to tell you something, other times, screams, but muffled, like they're coming from behind a wall." He paused, his eyes clouding with a distant memory. "I remember one night, years ago, I was fixing a leaky faucet on the 14th floor, room 1402. Empty room. Suddenly, I hear this music, piano music, clear as day, like someone was giving a concert in there, but the room was locked, empty that I checked." Sarah scribbled furiously. "And you've never found an explanation for it?" He shook his head. "Never, just chalked it up to the Cecil being the Cecil. This place, it holds on to things, trauma, pain, secrets, they all seep into the walls, into the pipes, into the very air we breathe." He looked directly at her, his eyes filled with a strange intensity. "You're investigating the Lamb case, right? The girl in the water tank?" Sarah nodded slowly. That was a bad one. Real bad, and I'm not sure the explanations they're giving are the right ones. There's something else at play here, something the police aren't seeing." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. "The Cecil has a way of taking things out of using people. Maybe it took her, maybe it needed her." Miguel's gaze darted around the room, as if he feared being overheard. "This place, it's hungry, Miss Chen, hungry for attention, hungry for stories, and sometimes, it gets what it wants." He took another swig of his coffee, his hand trembling slightly. "Just be careful, Miss Chen, this hotel, it has teeth." Sarah closed her notebook, a chilling premonition settling over her. She stood up, the rickety chair scraping against the concrete floor. "Thank you, Miguel. You've given me a lot to think about." As she turned to leave, she paused at the doorway. "One more thing, did you know Elisa Lam?" Miguel shook his head. "Never met her, just saw her on the security footage, seemed like a nice girl, lost, maybe, but nice." He hesitated again, then added, his voice barely audible, "I just hope. I hope she's at peace now. This place, it doesn't let people rest easy." Broken promises. The motel room's buzzing light fixture grated on Sarah's nerves, a harsh counterpoint to the unsettling quiet she'd encountered within the Cecil's labyrinthine corridors. Across the plastic-topped desk lay the police report, a sterile document that failed to convey the suffocating dread Miguel had impressed upon her. The report was flanked by printed news stories detailing Elisa Lam's vanishing act and the grim discovery that followed. Sarah's lacquered nail tapped against a passage chronicling Lam's arrival, traveling solo, en route to Santa Cruz, standard fare, yet, a shiver traced her spine as she contrasted it with an LAPD quote from a news clipping. Lam had an arranged rendezvous in Santa Cruz, a detail curiously missing from the official record. A minor divergence, perhaps, but the inconsistencies were beginning to accumulate. Another news story highlighted the initial search operation, with emphasis on the rooftop access, locked and alarmed. The police report, by contrast, simply noted the door was locked, omitting any mention of a security system. Were they minimizing something, or were they purposefully withholding crucial details? The more she examined, the more unnerved she felt. Minute discrepancies mutated into chasms, and plausible explanations began to crumble. It resembled a jigsaw puzzle assembled with pieces that didn't quite belong, forced together to fabricate a half-truth. Fueled by tepid coffee and mounting disquiet, Sarah navigated to an online haven for Mystery buffs. Elisa Lam case, exposing the truth, the thread blared. She scrolled through a chaotic landscape of conjecture, where armchair detectives spun narratives ranging from the insightful to the utterly bizarre, some fixated on the hotel's grim legacy, citing countless suicides and acts of violence. Others zeroed in on Lam's psychological state, proposing a descent into madness. Then came the conspiracy theorists. Shadowy cabals, arcane rituals, and elaborate deceptions were offered as explanations. Point 1. Poster even included grainy satellite photos, alleging the Cecil stood astride a ley line, a vortex of paranormal energy. Sarah scoffed, yet a prickle of unease persisted. Even within the ridiculous, a kernel of doubt remained. A single comment caught her eye, a user by the handle Night Owl LA, who claimed to have been briefly employed at the Cecil after Lamb's demise. Night Owl LA alluded to internal pressure to soft-pedal the incident, implying that management valued reputation over resolution. The comment concluded with an ominous warning: some doors are better left shut. Sarah shut the laptop, the screen's reflection mirrored in her widened eyes. The conspiracy theories were easy fodder for dismissal, but the inconsistencies in the official storyline were not. Miguel's apprehensions echoed in her mind, a chilling reminder of the hotel's sordid past. Was she hunting a phantom, or was a more sinister truth lurking in the shadows? Logic urged her to retreat, to attribute it all to coincidence and move on, but the journalist within, driven by an insatiable hunger for the real story, would not be quelled. Elisa Lam was owed justice, and Sarah was determined to provide it, regardless of the risk. She reached for her phone and punched in a number. "Hey, it's Sarah, need a solid. Could you pull up everything you can on the Cecil Hotel's alarm system, specifically, rooftop access points, January 2013 functionality, and recorded breaches are what I'm after." The voice on the other end, belonging to an ex-colleague at the LA Times, sounded like he'd just been awakened. "The Cecil? Seriously, Sarah, that place is reputedly haunted. You ghost hunting or something? Just indulge me, okay? This could be huge." Sarah paused, marshalling her thoughts. "And, if you can swing it, see if you can access any internal LAPD correspondence pertaining to the Lamb case, the stuff that didn't make it to the press. That's a Herculean ask, you know that, right? But I owe you one. I'll see what I can unearth." Sarah disconnected, a knot of anxiety tightening in her core. She was venturing into perilous territory, challenging a narrative that powerful entities seemed committed to preserving, but turning back was no longer an option. The broken promises contained within the police report, the unanswered questions teeming in the forums, the unsettling tales from Miguel, they all pointed to something far graver than a simple mishap. They hinted at a deliberate effort to bury the truth, and Sarah meant to exhume it, even if it meant facing the Cecil's black heart itself. She caught her reflection in the motel mirror, her eyes burning with determination. The pursuit had commenced. Rooftop revelation. The stairwell assaulted her with a miasma of old cigarettes and a coppery tang reminiscent of dried blood. Each footfall resonated unnervingly in the cramped space, the chill concrete a stark contrast to the warmth trapped within her worn sneakers. Opting for the 10th floor fire exit, figuring it would be less traversed than the main route, she felt her pulse thrum a frantic rhythm against her ribs, an insistent counterpoint to the oppressive silence. Reaching the rooftop access, a rudimentary metal handle and time-worn bolt lock were the only barriers. Unlocked, hesitation gave way as Sarah nudged the door ajar. A sudden gust, infused with the sharp bite of city smog, stung her cheeks. She squeezed through, quickly securing the portal behind her. Above, a bleak expanse of tar and pebbles stretched out. That a faded cerulean sky offered a vast, indifferent backdrop. The Hollywood sign, a distant beacon of aspiration, seemed to mock her from this height, but the panorama was irrelevant. Her gaze zeroed in on the water tanks, looming metallic behemoths that dominated the vista, their dull surfaces worn by time and weather. 3 sentinels, identical in their massiveness, stood guard over a somber enigma. A queasy wave crested within her. This was it, the final stop for Elisa Lam, the atmosphere hung thick, imbued with a palpable sorrow, a lingering residue of despair. She forced her legs to move, each step a crunching protest on the coarse gravel. As she neared the nearest tank, its scale dwarfed her expectations, easily exceeding 10 feet in both height and diameter. A simple ladder, bolted fast, ascended to a circular hatch on top. The hatch, a solid metal disc, was sealed tight. She brushed her fingers over the cool, abrasive surface, searching for any sign of tampering, any yielding. Nothing. Solid. She circumscribed the base, her vision sweeping the surrounding space. Unoccupied. Or so it seemed. That a prickling sensation began its ascent up her spine, the unwelcome feeling of scrutiny. She froze, breath snagging in her windpipe, and surveyed the neighboring buildings. Windows reflected back, vacant and inscrutable, yet the feeling persisted, a subtle weight at the nape of her neck. Dismissing it as mere jitters, she pressed on. Tucked into a dim recess near the tank's foundation, she discovered a small, ramshackle shed. The door sagged open slightly, revealing a shadowy interior. Tentatively, she pushed it further. The shed overflowed with discarded implements, dusty piping, and rolls of insulation. A musty odor of mildew and decay permeated the air. Cobwebs draped everything like macabre decorations. Time seemed to have bypassed this place. Then she saw it. Nestled on a high shelf, obscured by a jumble of rusted paint cans, lay a weighty, leather-bound ledger. A record of maintenance. Her heart leaped with anticipation. This could be the key, the revelation she sought. With care, she reached, dislodging the book from its resting place. A cloud of dust erupted, triggering a cough. The leather was cracked and fragile, the pages yellowed with age. She opened it, her digits trembling with a nervous energy. The entries were meticulously handwritten, a precise, disciplined script, dates, times, concise descriptions of work completed, standard upkeep, checking water levels, examining pipes, swapping filters. Page after page of humdrum details. She scanned the notes, her eyes hunting for anomalies, anything pertaining to the water tanks. Days bled into weeks, weeks into months. Then, a notation jumped out. January 2013, mere weeks before Elisa Lamb vanished. Water tank number 2, complaint unusual taste and odor, inspected, noted minor sediment accumulation, tank flushed. No other issues evident. Sediment, could it have been caused by decomposition? She flicked back through the book, searching for any prior mentions of the tanks. She uncovered a few, mostly routine checks. But then, another entry snagged her attention, dating back several years. Water tank number 3, access hatch found unsecured, secured and relocked. Unsecured, how could that be? What reason? Sarah began furiously transcribing the relevant entries into her small notebook, the pen's tip scratching a hectic counterpoint on the paper. She'd need to investigate these dates, confirm them with any other evidence available. As she copied notes, the sensation of being observed intensified. No longer a subtle weight, but a distinct awareness. A palpable gaze boring into her back. She whirled around, scrutinizing the rooftop anew. Still nothing, yet a chill descended, the silence becoming heavier, more significant. The wind felt like it whispered secrets in a language she couldn't decipher, carrying with it the faint, unsettling aroma of decay. She had to leave. Closing the register, she gently returned it to its position on the shelf, striving to return everything to the state in which she found it. She exited the shed briskly, back into the relative expanse of the rooftop. As she reached the doorway to the stairwell, she couldn't dislodge the sensation of pursuit. She risked a final glance, her eyes scanning the water tanks. They loomed against the sky, their dark secrets cloaked beneath their metallic exteriors. Then, it happened. A ripple of movement, a flicker of shadow near the base of the furthest tank. Something, or someone, was watching. Fear gripped her with icy fingers. She wrenched open the entrance and plunged into the inky blackness of the stairwell, the heavy metal door slamming shut, severing the light and stranding her with her terror. The reverberating clang echoed in her ears, chasing her down the stairwell as she fled. Medication mysteries. Back in her cramped room, the floral wallpaper seemed to press in on Sarah, the faded roses morphing into accusing eyes. She shivered, despite the stuffy air, and pulled her laptop closer. The rooftop incident had rattled her more than she cared to admit. Paranoia nipped at her heels, whispering doubts about her sanity and the wisdom of this entire endeavor. She forced herself to focus. Elisa Lam, the official narrative. Accidental drowning, possibly exacerbated by bipolar disorder. Sarah refused to accept it at face value. The elevator video, Lam's behavior. It felt off, staged almost, but if not a deliberate act, then what? The accidental drowning theory hinged on Lam's mental state. Sarah navigated the labyrinthine depths of the internet, searching for any shred of information about Lam's medical history, blog posts, news articles, amateur sleuth forums. A cacophony of speculation and misinformation. It took hours of sifting, of verifying sources and cross-referencing details, to filter out the noise. Finally, she found a breakthrough. A cached forum post, since deleted, mentioned Lam's possible struggle with adherence to her medication regime. The poster claimed to have seen snippets of Lam's online activity, specifically searches related to potential side effects and interactions of mood stabilizers. Sarah felt a jolt of adrenaline. This was it, something concrete. She dug deeper. Using advanced search operators and accessing archived web pages, hours blurred into a frantic race against the clock, the glow of the laptop screen reflecting in her wide, tired eyes. The Cecil's unsettling silence amplified the frantic clicking of the mouse. Then, she found it, buried deep within an obscure medical forum, a post seemingly authored by Elisa Lam, dated a few weeks before her trip to Los Angeles. The post detailed concerns about a specific medication, Lamictal, also known as lamotrigine. Sarah typed the name into her search engine, her fingers trembling slightly. The results flooded the screen. An anticonvulsant and mood stabilizer commonly used to treat bipolar disorder, but the side effects. She scrolled through the list, her breath catching in her throat. Nausea, dizziness, blurred vision, loss of coordination, severe skin rashes, including Stevens-Johnson syndrome, a life-threatening condition, and, more disturbingly, in rare cases, suicidal thoughts and behaviors. Sarah leaned back, her head swimming. Could this be it? Could the medication itself have contributed to Lam's erratic behavior? Was she experiencing an adverse reaction, a terrifying descent into a drug-induced psychosis? The problem was, lamotrigine was prescribed for bipolar disorder. If she'd had an adverse reaction, it was a possibility, but not a certainty. She needed an expert opinion. She found an online medical consultation service, promising anonymity and quick responses. She uploaded screenshots of the forum post, the lamotrigine side effects list, and a brief summary of the Elisa Lam case. Within an hour, she received a reply from a Dr. Anya Sharma, a psychiatrist specializing in mood disorders. While I cannot provide a definitive diagnosis without a full medical history and examination, the information you provided is certainly suggestive, Dr. Sharma wrote. Lamotrigine can, in rare cases, cause paradoxical reactions, leading to increased anxiety, agitation, and even psychotic symptoms. Discontinuation syndrome can also mimic or worsen psychiatric symptoms. Furthermore, non-adherence to medication, or fluctuations in dosage, can destabilize mood and lead to unpredictable behavior. Could this explain her behavior in the elevator video? Sarah typed back, her fingers flying across the keyboard. It's certainly a plausible explanation, Dr. Sharma replied. The erratic movements, the apparent disorientation, these could be manifestations of drug-induced psychosis or a severe mood swing triggered by medication irregularities. However, other factors, such as substance abuse or an underlying neurological condition, cannot be ruled out without further investigation. Sarah stared at the screen, her mind racing. Substance abuse. The autopsy report had come back clean. Neurological condition. There was no mention of anything like that in any of the reports, but Dr. Sharma's words had given her a new avenue to explore. The medication, the dosage, the possibility of an adverse reaction. This was more than just a potential answer. it was a justification for her presence here. A confirmation that she wasn't chasing shadows. A sudden flicker of the lights in her room made her jump. A low hum filled the air, followed by a brief, sharp buzz. The light stabilized, but a knot of unease tightened in her stomach. It was just the old wiring, she told herself, just the decrepit state of the Cecil Hotel, but the roses on the wallpaper seemed to be watching her again, their painted petals rustling in the still air, and in the darkness beyond the window, she could almost feel the weight of unseen eyes, pressing in, waiting, ghostly encounters. A low thrum, almost subsonic, threaded itself through the hotel's customary din. Sarah initially ignored it, chalking it up to the building's decrepitude, the wheeze of ancient plumbing she'd grown accustomed to, but as the hours bled into night, the vibration intensified, permeating the room, a palpable hum against the soles of her feet through the worn carpet. Then, the lights began a nervous flicker, not a blackout, but a subtle, unnerving play of light and shadow, like a phantom hand on a dimmer switch. Sarah perched rigidly on the bed's edge, her pulse a frantic drum against her ribs. She sought rationale, faulty wiring, a power fluctuation in this relic, yet, logic felt thin, unconvincing against the creeping disquiet that tightened its grip on her gut. Reaching for her phone, she considered Googling Cecil Hotel electrical grid issues, then paused. What if the problem wasn't electrical? What if something else was at play? Swallowing hard, she forced a steadying breath. Pull yourself together, Sarah, she murmured, the words a fragile shield against the rising dread. It's just a rundown hotel. She flicked on the bedside lamp, bathing the room in a jaundiced glow, hoping to scatter the shadows that seemed to deepen in the corners like gathering secrets. The buzzing escalated, transforming into a piercing whine that resonated in her jaw. Then came the scratching. A delicate rasping, a tentative sound emanating from behind the peeling wallpaper near the headboard, irregular, hesitant, like something testing the surface. Unsure of purchase, Sarah went still, every muscle coiled. She strained to discern the nature of the sound, breath frozen. The scratching ceased. An eternity ticked by, senses on high alert. Silence, perhaps a trick of the ear, just the wind sighing through a chink in the wall. Then it recommenced, louder, more insistent now, definitively scratching, and undeniably originating from within the wall itself. Sarah leaped from the bed, thoughts scattering like startled birds. Rats? The cadence felt too deliberate, too patterned. It echoed, purpose, snatching a weighty volume from her bag, a collection of true crime essays. She warily approached the wall. A light tap on the plaster, the scratching stopped instantly. She waited, nothing. A firmer rap this time, still nothing. Fueled by a surge of adrenaline, she slammed the book against the wall. The scratching exploded into a frenzy, a frantic scrabbling that iced her veins. She recoiled, dropping the book, eyes wide with burgeoning terror. The noise persisted for a few heartbeats, then vanished, leaving an oppressive quiet in its wake. Sleep offered no escape that night. Turbulent dreams plagued her, shadowy figures drifting through the hotel's corridors, their features lost in darkness. She saw Elisa Lamb, eyes wide with terror, reaching out to her from the inky depths of a water tank. She jolted awake, gasping, heart hammering a frantic rhythm, sheets twisted around her like restraints. The room felt frigid, the air heavy with an unfamiliar odor, sharp, metallic, disoriented. She groped for the lamp, fingers trembling against the base. The clock glared 3:17 a.m. She sank back against the pillows, attempting to quell the frantic pulse in her throat, but the nightmare's images clung stubbornly, refusing to fade. As dawn crept closer, a sense of observation settled upon her. She couldn't shake the premonition that she was not alone, that unseen eyes tracked her every movement. She found herself constantly glancing back, her gaze skittering nervously around the space. She began to suspect the issue transcended the facts of the case, that she was haunted by the accumulated weight of the Cecil's history, the stories of despair and desperation etched into the very bones of the building. Perhaps their residual energy lingered, trapped, manifesting as unsettling noises and phantom visions. Or maybe the hotel amplified her own anxieties, warping perception, blurring the boundaries between the tangible and the imagined. The notion chilled her. Was she unraveling? Was the Cecil Hotel driving her to the brink? The need to escape the oppressive atmosphere, even momentarily, became paramount. She reached for the doorknob, and noticed something glinting on the floor. A tarnished key lying directly before the door. She hadn't seen it there before. Picking it up, she turned it in her palm. An antique key, its brass surface corroded with a GE.an ornate number was etched into its face. 417. Her room was 416. A wave of lightheadedness swept through her. No memory of seeing a key prior, and how had it arrived there? She stared at the key, a knot of apprehension clenching in her stomach. That it felt like an invitation, a beckoning from the hotel's shadowed past. Or a warning, perhaps. Regardless, a feeling took hold that she was being drawn inexorably deeper into the Cecil's labyrinth. The detective's doubts. The antique key felt heavy in Sarah's palm, a cold weight against her increasingly clammy skin. Room 417. The number echoed in her mind, a discordant note in the already chaotic symphony of the Cecil. She needed to ground herself, to find a voice of reason outside the hotel's suffocating atmosphere. Detective Ramirez. She dug through her bag, retrieved her laptop, and booted it up. The Wi-Fi signal, predictably, was weak and sputtering. After several attempts, she finally managed to access her email and locate Ramirez's contact information. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Reaching out to him felt like crossing a threshold, admitting that she wasn't just a curious bystander anymore, but the image of Elisa Lam. Her wide, frightened eyes staring out from the elevator footage propelled her forward. The phone rang 3 times before a gruff voice answered. Ramirez. Detective Ramirez, this is Sarah Chen. We spoke a few weeks ago about the Elisa Lam case. A pause. Chen, right? The blogger. What can I do for you? His tone was clipped, wary. I'm in Los Angeles. I'm actually staying at the Cecil Hotel. A longer pause, filled only with static. The Cecil? Why the hell would you do that? I wanted to see things for myself, and I've uncovered some things, some inconsistencies that I think there was more to it than just a tragic accident. He sighed, the sound heavy with world weariness. Look, Ms. Chen, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but the case is closed. The official explanation. I know the official explanation, Sarah interrupted, her voice trembling slightly, but it doesn't make sense, and I think something's happening here, something wrong. There was a shift in his tone, a flicker of something akin to interest. Wrong how? Sarah hesitated, unsure how much to reveal over the phone. It's hard to explain. That I'd rather show you. Would you be willing to meet? He grumbled something unintelligible. All right, meet me tomorrow, Grand Central Market, noon, and Ms. Chen. Yes. Be careful, that place, it chews people up and spits them out. The line went dead. Sarah stared at her laptop screen, the detective's words hanging in the air like a shroud. The next day, Sarah found Ramirez at a small pupuseria in Grand Central Market. He was a large man, his face etched with the lines of countless sleepless nights and hard-won battles. That he looked even more jaded in person, his eyes holding a deep-seated cynicism that made her feel instantly uneasy. You're braver than I thought, he said, nodding towards a nearby table. Most people wouldn't last a night in that rat trap. Sarah slid into the seat opposite him, the vibrant chaos of the market a stark contrast to the oppressive atmosphere of the Cecil. I'm determined to find out the truth, she said. That he took a long sip of his coffee. The truth is a slippery thing, Ms. Chen, sometimes it's better left buried. But what if it isn't? Sarah pressed. What if there's someone covering up the truth? Ramirez scrutinized her, his gaze unnervingly intense. You've been spending too much time in that place. That it's getting to you. Maybe, Sarah conceded, but I've found things, discrepancies, and that key. That I found an old key outside my door. It's for room 417, but the room doesn't seem to exist. Have you ever heard of it? Ramirez's eyebrows furrowed. 417, no, that's not right. He paused, thinking, look, officially, the Lamb case was a tragic accident, but off the record. I had my doubts, there were things that didn't add up, the security footage was incomplete, there were blind spots, areas the cameras didn't cover, and the fire escape, anyone could have accessed the roof through the fire escape. No alarm, no lock, nothing. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. That hotel was a sieve, anyone could get in, anyone could get out, and the staff, let's just say discretion came at a price. He went on to describe the hotel's antiquated security system, the lax oversight of the staff, and the ease with which someone could disappear within its labyrinthine corridors. That he spoke of the persistent rumors of drug use, prostitution, and other illicit activities that thrived within the Cecil's walls. The official report blamed her mental state, said she was off her medication. But that doesn't explain everything. It doesn't explain how she got onto that roof, past that locked door, without triggering any alarms. He paused, then added, and it doesn't explain why the hotel covered up the fact that several other people had access to the roof. Sarah felt a chill crawl down her spine. You think someone helped her? Ramirez shrugged. I think the investigation was incomplete, rushed, there was pressure to close the case, to avoid any further negative publicity for the city. He finished his coffee, his expression grim. Be careful, Miss Chen, that you're playing with fire, that place, it's got a way of sucking people in, and once it has you, it doesn't let go. The suspect emerges. Sarah worried her thumbnail between her teeth, the pale light from the laptop screen painting her face in the gloom. Detective Ramirez's caution haunted her. Be careful, Sarah, that case. It was murky. The detective's concern amplified the hotel's already palpable unease. That she'd spent hours sifting through guest lists, matching names to online personas. It was grueling work, a digital scavenger hunt, driven by a desperate need to unlock the mystery surrounding Elisa Lam. Most profiles were unremarkable, showcasing vacation snapshots and mundane updates. Then she stumbled upon Arthur Davies. The name itself didn't register immediately. It was the profile picture that snagged her attention. A blurred image of a man with restless eyes and a tight-lipped, almost predatory smile. Even in the still image, he radiated anxiety. His bio was brief: aspiring writer, truth seeker. Clicking through to his blog revealed a jumbled collection of unfinished verses, philosophical musings, and veiled statements. The deeper she scrolled, the more unnerved she felt. Recurring themes emerged: the sensation of being watched, the presence of unseen pursuers. That he portrayed the city as a concrete labyrinth, lamented the tainted water, and described the elevators as gateways to unseen realms. A shiver traced its way down Sarah's spine. This wasn't simple eccentricity, these were echoes of the very theories swirling around Elisa Lam's final hours: the water tank, the elevator's strange behavior, the feeling of being followed. They all resonated within Davies' increasingly unhinged posts. A particular entry, dated just a week before Sarah's arrival at the Cecil, stopped her cold. She dances in the elevator, oblivious to the gazes upon her. They observe, they linger, they devour. The text was paired with a distorted photograph of an elevator interior, the mirrored reflection warped into grotesque parodies of human form. Sarah's breath hitched. This couldn't be mere coincidence. The specificity was chilling, too closely aligned with the narrative she was painstakingly constructing. Could Arthur Davies have been present at the Cecil during Elisa Lam's stay? Had he witnessed something? Or, a terrifying possibility, had he played a part? She dug further, seeking connections between Davies and 2013. A cached version of his Facebook profile surfaced. Location: Los Angeles, California. He'd been here. Then, her heart hammered. This was it, the break she craved. Arthur Davies. A person of interest. The realization was both thrilling and frightening. She was walking a tightrope over a chasm of darkness, a darkness that had already engulfed one young woman. Yet, she couldn't retreat. The truth beckoned, shimmering just beyond her reach, and she resolved to grasp it, whatever the cost. She shut her laptop, the sudden darkness intensifying the room's disquiet. the hotel's noises seemed to amplify, the floorboards' complaints, the faint echo of voices, the almost inaudible thrum of ancient pipes. She needed to tread carefully. A direct confrontation with Davies was out of the question, a perilous proposition. She required more intel, more corroboration. She needed to decipher his motives, his link to Elisa Lam, her immediate course, surveillance. She would shadow him, charting his patterns, looking for any indication of guilt or deception. She would become his unseen observer, a silent presence in the Cecil's convoluted corridors. As she lay in bed, eyes fixed on the water-stained ceiling, Davies' blog entries played in her mind like a broken record, the paranoia, the obsession, the veiled threats. It was deeply unsettling. What kind of demons haunted him? What secrets did he guard? Sleep proved elusive. Each creak and groan of the building fueled her anxiety. The Cecil felt sentient, watching, waiting. She clutched the blanket, trying to ward off the pervasive chill. She knew focusing on Davies was a gamble. He might be nothing more than an oddball, his online ramblings the product of a fertile imagination, but her instinct screamed otherwise. A darkness clung to him, a connection to the Elisa Lam case that demanded investigation. She had her suspect. Now, she had to prove it, but within the decaying shell of the Cecil Hotel, proving anything was a perilous undertaking. Confrontation in the corridor. The fluorescent lights of the Cecil's 6th floor hummed, casting a sickly yellow glow that seemed to cling to the peeling wallpaper. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the unsettling quiet. She watched Arthur Davies' door, room 608, from the alcove near the ice machine, the metallic tang of the water hanging heavy in the air. He emerged at last, shuffling out of his room around 11 p.m. He wore the same rumpled gray suit she'd seen him in before, the fabric looking permanently creased, as if he slept in it. His gait was uneven, a slight limp favoring his left leg. He clutched a worn leather briefcase to his chest. This was it. Sarah took a deep breath, steeling herself. She stepped out of the alcove, her footsteps echoing unnervingly in the corridor. "Mr. Davies," she called out, her voice sounding far too loud in the stillness. He stopped, his shoulders hunching slightly. He turned, his face pale and gaunt under the harsh lighting. His eyes, magnified by thick glasses, darted around the corridor, avoiding direct contact. "Yes," he croaked, his voice raspy. Sarah approached him, trying to project an air of confidence she didn't feel. "My name is Sarah Chen. I'm a researcher." She hated the lie, but revealing her true motives felt too risky. "I'm working on a project about the Cecil Hotel, its history, and some of the incidents that have occurred here." Davies' grip tightened on his briefcase. "Incidents," he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. "Yes," Sarah said, pushing forward, "including the Elisa Lam case." The effect was immediate. Davies flinched, his face paling even further. A tick appeared in his left cheek, a small muscle jumping erratically. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, his eyes flickering nervously. "I've been reading your blog, Mr. Davies," Sarah said, her voice hardening. "The one you abruptly stopped posting on, the one where you talked about the water tasting strange, about feeling watched, about the elevators behaving oddly." He took a step back, his eyes wide with what looked like genuine fear. That was just paranoia. I was unwell. I am unwell." He gestured vaguely towards his head. Sarah didn't believe him for a second. "You described the symptoms almost exactly as they were reported during the Elisa Lam case, the discolored water, the erratic elevator behavior." "Coincidence?" he insisted, his voice rising slightly, though still hushed. "Just coincidence that I'm a writer. I have an active imagination." He dabbed at his forehead with a handkerchief that appeared as rumpled as his suit. "An active imagination that eerily mirrors the events surrounding a young woman's death." Sarah pressed. "You wrote about feeling like you were being followed, Mr. Davies. Were you following Elisa Lam?" He recoiled as if struck. "Absolutely not. How dare you suggest such a thing?" His voice cracked, betraying his composure. He began to fidget, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. He looked like a trapped animal, desperate to escape. Sarah watched him closely, cataloging his every movement, every twitch. Then why did you stop writing? Why the sudden silence? He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. I received threatening messages, online, people didn't appreciate my theories. Threatening messages? Sarah raised an eyebrow, skeptical. From whom? He hesitated, his eyes darting towards the end of the hallway. I don't know, anonymous, they told me to stop, or else. Sarah doubted his story that he was lying, she was sure of it, but she needed to tread carefully, she couldn't accuse him outright without proof. Mr. Davies, I understand this is unsettling, but I believe you may have information that could be helpful in understanding what happened to Elisa Lam. He shook his head vehemently. I have nothing, that I know nothing, please, leave me alone. He clutched his briefcase tighter, as if it were a shield. Just tell me one thing, Sarah said, lowering her voice. Did you see her, Mr. Davies? Did you see Elisa Lam in the days before she disappeared? He looked at her, his eyes filled with a strange mixture of fear and desperation. For a moment, Sarah thought he was going to confess, but then, his expression hardened. I've said all I'm going to say, now, if you'll excuse me. He pushed past her, his shoulder brushing against hers. Sarah smelled a faint, musty odor emanating from him, like old books and something else, something vaguely metallic. He hurried down the corridor, his limp more pronounced now, disappearing around the corner towards the elevators. Sarah stood there, her heart pounding, the silence of the corridor pressing in on her. The confrontation had been brief, unsatisfying. That he had denied everything, but his nervousness, his evasiveness, his fear, it all screamed of guilt. She watched the spot where he had disappeared, a sense of unease settling over her. Arthur Davies was hiding something, and Sarah was more determined than ever to find out what it was. The coded message. The weight of Arthur Davies's concealed terror settled heavily on Sarah in her room. His denials, brittle as spun glass, echoed in her mind, his gaze flitting like a cornered animal's. That he was guarding a secret, she felt it in her bones. But what secret? More than intuition and a defunct blogger's morbid fantasies, she needed tangible proof. Elisa Lam's room swam back into focus. Had a vital clue been overlooked by the police, by herself? A renewed resolve propelled her from her room and back to the fourth floor. Silence hung thick in the corridor, broken only by the city's muted drone. The copied master key slid into the lock, the mechanism whispering open to room 416. The space remained imprinted in her memory, a compact, sterile box, suffused with a spectral aura. The ghost of disinfectant still clung to the air, the cleaning crew's futile attempt to exorcise the past. Methodically, Sarah restarted her search, retracing her previous steps. She probed beneath the mattress, behind the nightstand, even peered inside the grimy lampshade. Still nothing. Then, her gaze snagged on the baseboard along the far wall. Something was amiss. A hairline fracture marked where the wood panels failed to align perfectly, barely perceptible. Kneeling, she traced the edge, seeking a latch or hidden spring. Minutes bled into an eternity until, finally, pressure near the corner yielded a faint click. A segment of the baseboard gave way, revealing a shallow recess. Sarah's pulse quickened. Within, resting on a bed of brittle, yellowed paper, lay a tightly folded square of what appeared to be graph paper. Unfurling it with deliberate care, she found it covered in a dense array of numbers, symbols, and seemingly random letters, arranged in disciplined rows and columns. A cipher. This had to be a cipher. A wave of cold washed over her. Elisa had left a message, tucked away for only a knowing eye to uncover. What could it signify? Was it a roadmap to her vanishing, a final plea, or merely the product of a fractured mind? Sarah meticulously documented the coded message with her phone, capturing every nuance. Decoding it alone felt impossible. She required assistance. Only Evelyn Reed sprang to mind, the online acquaintance with an eccentric passion for puzzles. Evelyn's obsession with codes and ciphers verged on mania, but she was armed with a razor-sharp intellect and an almost supernatural gift for deciphering the inexplicable. Back in her room, Sarah opened her laptop and composed a message. Evelyn, urgent that I've discovered something. A coded message that I believe it may be connected to the Elisa Lam case. Are you available? She attached the photos and waited, breath suspended, the silence stretched, amplifying the city sounds. At last, the telltale ping of a new message shattered the tension. Fascinating. Send it forthwith. Why mental cogs are grinding already. Also, is this something potentially hazardous? Inquiring minds want to know, and may or may not be armed with emergency rations. Sarah managed a smile despite the situation's weight. Evelyn's peculiar humor was a welcome balm. She forwarded the images and a concise account of their discovery. I located it concealed in Elisa Lam's room at the Cecil Hotel. That I suspect it holds the key to understanding her fate, and yes, it could be perilous. That I believe someone at the hotel knows much more than they admit. Evelyn's reply was immediate. Cecil Hotel, a prime location for intrigue. Transmit all relevant data, background information, theories, anything useful. Context is king, the more, the merrier. Sarah devoted the next hour assembling everything she knew, from news reports and forum threads to her own observations and hunches. She funneled it all to Evelyn, including a comprehensive description of her encounter with Arthur Davies. Davies is definitely stonewalling, she typed. His blog entries mirrored details of the case too closely, and he shut down the instant I mentioned Elisa Lam. Evelyn responded succinctly, intriguing, this Davies individual warrants closer scrutiny, leave the cipher to me. I'll see what secrets it yields. Preliminary analysis suggests a substitution cipher, possibly with polyalphabetic elements, but more data is required. This may be a protracted endeavor. Thank you, Evelyn. I'm in your debt. Exercise caution. Caution is my raison d'etre, nestled between daring and brilliant. Fear not that I thrive on conundrums, particularly those steeped in potential danger. Keep me apprised of any developments, and try not to become a cold case yourself. Sarah. The deceased rarely excel at sending coded messages. Sarah closed her laptop, a fragile hope flickering amidst the encroaching shadows. She possessed a lead, a legitimate lead, and an ally, but the image of Arthur Davies, his haunted expression and cagey responses, haunted her. She was drawing nearer to the truth, but also plunging deeper into harm's way. She remained ignorant of the message's contents, but a chilling certainty grew within her. Someone was willing to kill to keep it buried, unmasking the truth. The email chimed at 3:17 a.m., jolting Sarah, fueled by stale coffee and jangled nerves. Evelyn, the subject line, got it. Her pulse leaped as she opened the message. A single image of text, each line felt like a lead weight settling in her stomach as she scrolled. Rooftop, West Tank, midnight, Nightingale. For curt words, suspended in the digital ether, Sarah parsed the message, her thoughts spiraling. Rooftop, straightforward. West Tank, more specific. Midnight, a furtive assignation, but Nightingale, the word felt alien and out of place. Evelyn, you're a gem. She tapped out, her fingers betraying a slight tremor. Any intel on Nightingale? The response was instantaneous. Could be a person, a code, a delivery. Context is key. Smells like something wicked, though. Wicked barely scratched the surface. A glacial dread seeped into Sarah's core. This wasn't a casual meetup. This was perilous, concealed, something worth killing for. Elisa Lam flashed into her mind, vibrant and full of life, entering that elevator, her final moments caught on grainy surveillance. What had she witnessed? What secret had she stumbled upon that led her to that rooftop, to that tank? A chilling epiphany. Elisa wasn't a casualty of some random occurrence. She was embroiled. This Nightingale transaction. She'd seen too much. Sarah roamed her room, the cheap carpet rasping against her skin. A drug score, money laundering. The Cecil, steeped in a history of violence and despair, was an ideal incubator for such clandestine dealings, masked by the transient clientele in shadowy corridors. And Arthur Davies, the unsettling janitor with the furtive gaze and knowing smirk that he slotted into the frame. Access to every corner of this place, intimate knowledge of its layout, its vulnerabilities, the secrets buried within its walls that he had been untruthful about. Elisa. Of that, she was certain. She powered up her laptop, retrieving the police report on Elisa Lam's disappearance. She scanned the statements, the timeline, the frustrating dearth of hard evidence. She had been so fixated on the paranormal, the spectral, that she had overlooked the obvious truth. This wasn't about specters. This was about something concrete, something far more menacing. She needed to unearth the meaning of Nightingale. Its purpose, Arthur Davies's involvement. Sarah punched Nightingale into a search engine, appending drug slang and code words. A deluge of useless results until she located it. A forum tracking narcotics trafficking. Several threads identified Nightingale as a street name for an exceptionally pure, highly lethal strain of heroin. Heroin, the word reverberated, laden with implications. Elisa had walked in on a heroin exchange. The Cecil, and paid the ultimate price. Anger surged through Sarah, scalding and fierce. They extinguished her life, extinguished it like a fragile flame, and they believed they could get away with it. She had to stop them in their tracks. A glance at the clock. 4:47 a.m. Too early for a confrontation with Davies. She needed a strategy, proof, caution. Evelyn, anchored to her computer miles away, came to mind, a beacon in the murk. Another email took shape. Evelyn, need you to dig into Arthur Davies, Cecil Hotel employee, find something, anything, arrests, financials, the works. She shut down her laptop, her mind a whirlwind. She was treading treacherous ground. She was stirring up a nest of vipers, and she had no idea the kind of venom they possessed. But retreat was impossible, not when she was on the cusp of revelation. She rose and gazed out the window, at the city lights blurring into streaks, the city of angels, concealing a darkness beneath its glossy allure, a darkness that devoured people whole. She had to expose the truth, regardless of the consequences, for Elisa, for herself. Justice served. The sodium lamps buzzed a dissonant chord as Sarah descended into the Cecil's bowels. Below, the air was a stagnant pool, thick with the reek of mold and long-lost things. Bless Evelyn, she'd liberated a security camera from the lobby, thankfully inert, and Sarah positioned it with care, its vacant lens trained on the cramped corridor leading to the laundry alcove. Arthur Davies favored that spot. Her gambit was simple. A lone, unlabeled baggie brimming with white powder, baking soda. Naturally, placed casually atop a pile of tattered linens near the hallway's entrance. A calculated risk, banking on Davies's cravings and desperation, but answers demanded a price. Sarah withdrew to a dusky recess behind a colossal furnace, heart thrumming a frantic tattoo against her ribs. The flashlight's ruby beam painted the grime-caked dials and pipes surrounding her in a hellish glow. She was the hunter, crouched in wait. Time crawled, each click of her watch an obtrusive intrusion in the echoing void. Doubt gnawed. What if she misread the signs? If Davies was simply a cantankerous old man, and she was poised to shatter his life on scant evidence and a fragile hunch? Then, movement. A phantom flicker in her periphery, a dusky silhouette emerging from the murk. Davies. He edged down the passage, his walk a jerky shamble, his features a study in weary resignation. He halted, gaze fastened on the baggie like a moth to a flame. Sarah's breath hitched as he reached, gnarled digits trembling. As he snatched it up. A furtive glance around, then it vanished into his pocket. That sealed it. She emerged from the shadows, her voice cutting through the sudden hush. Arthur Davies. We need to talk. He spun, eyes widening in a flare of raw panic. I don't know what you're talking about. His voice, a mere rasp, scratched the air. Nightingale, Sarah stated, the word hanging heavy as a sentence. Elisa Lam, the water tanks, the pieces fit, don't they? Davies's face crumbled. He resembled nothing so much as a trapped animal. You can't prove anything. Perhaps not in a courtroom, Sarah conceded, but I know the truth. You were peddling Nightingale, and Elisa saw too much. Isn't that right? Silence answered, a confession booming in its emptiness, driven by adrenaline and a ferocious thirst for justice. Sarah pressed. "Tell me what happened, Arthur, tell me about Elisa." His head drooped, his shoulders slumping under a sudden, crushing weight. The resistance seemed to seep from him. It was an accident, that I swear." "An accident?" Sarah's tone sharpened, laced with disbelief. "A young woman is dead, how is that an accident?" He began to weep, a dry, rattling sob. "I didn't mean for it to happen, that I needed the money, that my wife, she's ill." A sliver of something akin to pity flickered within Sarah, swiftly extinguished. This man had paved the road to Elisa's demise, whether directly or through reckless endangerment. No justification existed. "Tell me," she repeated, her voice like honed steel. "Tell me everything." And he unburdened himself. He admitted to dealing Nightingale within the Cecil's walls, the laundry room serving as a covert exchange point. He confessed that Elisa had stumbled upon a transaction, overhearing fragments of a conversation hinting at the drug's potency and perils. Panic seizing him, he gave chase, desperate to silence her, but she fled, vanishing into the hotel's labyrinthine depths. He stopped short of admitting murder. He claimed she became lost, somehow ascended to the roof, and tragically fell into the water tank. But Sarah glimpsed the deception lurking in his gaze. He might not have delivered the final push, but he bore responsibility for her fate. His actions, fueled by avarice, led inexorably to her tragic end. As he spoke, Sarah subtly texted Evelyn a prearranged signal. Her ally waited at a nearby cafe, poised to alert the authorities. Abruptly, the high-pitched whine of sirens sliced through the night. Headlights painted the grimy basement windows with stark beams. "It's over, Arthur," Sarah stated, her voice void of all emotion. Police swarmed the basement, guns glinting. Detective Ramirez, his face a roadmap of weariness, approached Sarah. "You again, Miss Chen, always stirring up trouble, aren't you?" His tone held no anger, only a weary resignation. He'd seen this play out countless times. Davies offered no resistance as they cuffed him. He simply stared at the floor, his face a canvas of shame and despair. Ramirez pivoted to Sarah, his gaze piercing. "We'll need your statement again." Sarah nodded, numbed. It concluded. Or at least, the immediate threat did. The following morning, Sarah stood facing the Cecil Hotel, the emerging sun casting elongated shadows across the avenue. The structure towered before her, a mute monument to secrets and anguish. She drew a deep breath, the air surprisingly invigorating compared to the basement's suffocating stagnation. She surrendered her key at the front desk. Checking out, she didn't glance backward. As she moved away, the conviction lingered that she was leaving a fragment of herself behind. The Cecil had irrevocably marked her, exposing her to the darkness festering beneath the facade of normalcy. She had confronted the abyss, and its gaze remained imprinted on her soul. She had secured a measure of justice for Elisa Lamb, but the truth proved a weighty burden. The image of the young woman's face, brimming with hope and optimism, would forever be etched into her memory. Before she departed the station, Detective Ramirez had cautioned. "Don't let it consume you, kid, you did good, now get out there and live." His counsel resonated. She needed to forge ahead, but forgetting was impossible. The Cecil, Elisa, and the malevolence she had unearthed would forever remain interwoven into her story. She would shoulder that weight, using it to galvanize her resolve to champion justice, wherever its pursuit led. Sarah hailed a cab, supplying the driver with her home address. As the car peeled away from the curb, she cast one final glance at the Cecil. It stood there, unchanged, a silent witness to the shadows it harbored. Justice had been dispensed, yet the specters of the Cecil Hotel would continue to haunt her waking and sleeping thoughts.